This video is the fourth in a 30-part series analyzing the insect orders. This video covers mayflies, or the order Hemiptera, which is one of the orders found within Paleoptera, meaning ancient winged. This is the oldest group of insects that possess wings, and contains the mayflies, dragonflies, and damselflies. Their wings are primitive in this regard because they are unable to fold over their body. This group is also the only one that has wings in its second to last molt. Every other type of insect that is winged is only winged in its adult form due to the engineering trade-offs that powered flight imposes. Mayflies, or Hemiptera, are the one exception to this rule, and is because of their penultimate molt or subimago stage. The order name of the mayflies is Hemiptera, which was coined by the Danish zoologist Johann Christian Fabricius in 1793. The name comes from the Greek ephemeros, meaning short-lived or lasting a day, and ptera, meaning wing. Morphologically, these insects actually possess similar traits to bristletails. They typically have 2 to 3 tails used for detecting vibrations and predators. These two are called the cerci, and if they possess a middle one, it's called the terminal or caudal filament. Their name is apt, as these insects, when they molt and finally get their wings, come out to mate and only last about a day, or often even less time. This is in part what allows them to have wings in their penultimate stage. These insects are remarkably soft as adults. This lack of hardening of the wings synergizes with the short time of use. I would compare their wings to buying a cheap knockoff product. It does the same job and costs less money or energy to produce, but it is not built to last and serves as a short-term solution. This inherent disposability works very well for these insects. After spending a year or so underwater, they all come out of the water in one coordinated effort, reproduce, lay their young, and then perish en masse. This helps to elucidate why every other insect group does not grow wings in any stage but the adult. Wings need to work for longevity if they are to be used. Only in an ancient group whose flight is more primitive does such a strategy work. In the same way that dragonflies' primitive wings have allowed them to dominate and have a monopoly on the aerial predator niche, mayflies' primitive wings have allowed them to capitalize and have a monopoly on the strength by numbers niche, specifically in aquatic ecosystems. In the previous video, I discussed how freshwater ecosystems are more conducive to predators than herbivores, whereas terrestrial forested ecosystems are the opposite. This is because in forests, despite there being more nutrients overall, they are locked up in massive trees and only slowly re-enter the ecosystem when plants shed their leaves or die. In freshwater ecosystems, nutrients are often more immediately available because water constantly redistributes organic matter. This strength in numbers strategy essentially makes mayflies aquatic cicadas, but the key difference is in their timing. Cicadas drain nutrients from the roots of trees, but their larval form does this typically over a longer period of time than mayfly larvae. Mayfly larvae consume plant matter at the bottom of rivers and other freshwater bodies. Mayflies have adapted the strength in numbers niche to aquatic environments, and cicadas have done so to the terrestrial forests, which is why the length of their larval stages are different, to account for this nutrient radiation. An important thing to understand about mayflies is that when you're seeing them out of the water, their features may appear and sound mechanically and morphologically extreme or impractical, such as a second pair of eyes for detecting females above in giant swarms. But these things make a lot more sense in the context of the extreme lengths mayflies go to in order to mate. There is an inherent risk to banking on fighting predators simply by being too numerous to be hunted and eaten. Namely, you need to limit how much nutrition you need in order to maximize the number of individuals ready to mate. As a general rule, complexity and competition motivate and influence each other to create creatures that become more and more advanced. However, there is a limit to how advanced an organism can get within a certain market cap, so to speak, before it reaches evolutionary stasis. What I mean by this is that there are only so many nutrients in an ecosystem, and so mayflies must limit and refine their ergonomics to be extremely economically efficient. This is the driving factor that designs their 24-hour swarms. The mayfly is designed to be frail, defenseless, and disposable, or ephemeral. It is designed this way because evolution has dictated that this is the optimal design for the niche. The reason these insects even need wings before they enter adulthood is because within the last 24 hours of their lives, they need to leave the water. The surface of the water is extremely dangerous for insects, as it is a well-known way to score an easy meal. By having wings early, as opposed to dragonflies or other aquatic insects that need to crawl onto land before they begin their final molt, mayflies are able to immediately leave the water in search of a safe place to become adults. In other words, mayflies need their wings early precisely because they don't plan to be around very long. Other insects have a bit more time to kill before they mate, and so wait to be fully prepared. The mayfly can't afford to waste time, and thus has adapted to mitigate any and all risk. Cicadas are similar in this regard, although perhaps a bit less defenseless due to the higher aforementioned market cap of nutrients in forests. Forests are generally superior than rivers when it comes to nutrients, meaning cicadas can accumulate more resources during their long developmental period underground. This allows them to emerge in much greater numbers and with tougher exoskeletons compared to mayflies, which have a much shorter aquatic larval stage and a more fragile adult form. Cicadas are currently more successful than mayflies due to having a higher budget, so to speak. But mayflies beat them in sheer length of time they've been on Earth. That is evolutionary history. In line with their strength in numbers strategy, both cicadas and mayflies have a high fecundity, laying hundreds to thousands of eggs at a time. And when they are born, mayfly aquatic larvae also often disperse passively via drift, where they float downstream to colonize new habitats. Mayfly larvae, or nymphs, are crucial components of freshwater ecosystems. Functionally, they serve as primary consumers, feeding on detritus, periphyton, and algae, and thereby facilitate aquatic nutrient cycling. Additionally, they are a key prey source for fish, amphibians, and predatory invertebrates, making them a foundational part of aquatic food webs. Mayflies serve as crucial indicators of water quality, as their presence is strongly correlated with low pollution levels, as they feed on the detritus found in rivers, ponds, and lakes. They are widely used in biomonitoring programs where their absence can indicate key environmental stressors. Anglers also prize mayfly larvae as bait species, often making fish hooks that resemble them. Sometimes mayfly swarms can be intimidating to people and even overwhelming, and indeed they are. These are beautiful and massive congregations, which are a profound example of insect innovation, and a symbol for the ephemeral and mechanistically poignant biology of insects. Ultimately, the niche mayflies inhabit, though defined by a short-lived existence, underscores the power of numbers and survival in ecological dominance. Truly a wonderful order. Thank you for watching this latest episode. Be sure to stay tuned for more order analyses like these, along with a myriad other forms of bug content. Thanks. This is the third video in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This video covers Odonata, or dragonflies and damselflies. The easiest way to tell the difference between the two is first that dragonflies have larger eyes, wings, bodies, and just overall more vitality. The second way to tell is if the insect is perched and how it holds its wings. Dragonflies hold their wings spread eagle, whereas damselflies hold them vertically upright at rest. Lastly, dragonflies typically hunt and consume food and are flying the entire time. Damselflies, while still capable of this, typically perform a perch, then ambush hunting strategy. Most other aerial predators use this strategy. These bugs have excellent 360-degree vision, among the best in the insect kingdom, and are able to detect UV light. They use this sense for navigation, prey detection, and mate selection. These insects are harmless to humans. It was pointed out to me by an anonymous commenter that dragonflies are actually quite ineffective at controlling mosquito populations, despite both mosquitoes and dragonfly larval stages being aquatic. This is because dragonfly larvae typically inhabit running water like rivers and swamps, whereas mosquitoes typically grow in opportunistic stagnant puddles. This is because they both have different lifestyles that target different prey, which makes it so that dragonflies and mosquitoes will typically only come into conflict in their adult winged stages. Resources supporting this and the other topics discussed in this video are available in the description below. Dragonflies are the oldest known winged insect, and they are one of two insects in the grouping Paleoptera. Paleo meaning ancient, and ptera meaning wing. Paleoptera is a term for insects without the ability to fold their wings over their abdomen, distinguishing them from Neoptera or new wing. Dragonflies, damselflies, and mayflies are said to have ancient wings because these insects have retained ancestral primitive wings that cannot fold over their bodies. This is important to remember because the gross majority of insects possess wings. Broad categories with regards to wings are useful for both evolutionary categorization and taxonomic categorization. In other words, dragonflies, damselflies, and mayflies are defined both in evolution and name by the fact that they are unable to fold their wings over their abdomen, which is an ancient trait. Dragonflies and damselflies belong to the order Odonata. Their name comes from the ancient Greek word odis, meaning tooth. It's unsure why they are named this way, but one hypothesis is that it's relating to their jaws or maxillae, which appear to be toothed. They were named in 1793 by Johann Christian Fabricius. Dragonflies and damselflies spend the first part of their lives as aquatic ambush hunters. They then leave the water to metamorphose into aerial predators. These insects possess large compound eyes which give them a near 360-degree view of their surroundings and allow them to accurately target prey. These insects are often brightly colored, and due to their apex predator status among insects, can afford to stand out. Their vivid colors match their vitality and serve as attractive features to mates. The only insects that are comparably dangerous to other insects that fly are likely eusocial wasps, which is why some dragonflies actually mimic the coloration of wasps and even pretend their flight is handicapped like wasps to deter birds. If a dragonfly has colors that disguise it or make it harder to visually follow, it's usually to avoid birds or other vertebrates rather than other insects. Although some damselflies and dragonflies can occasionally be hunted by mantises and robberflies or even other dragonflies. As this insect grows, it molts multiple times and goes through what's called incomplete metamorphosis. What this means is that they molt a set number of times throughout their lives, with the adult stage being the only one with wings. What this means is for every single insect other than mayflies, if the insect has wings, it has completed growing. The reason for this is that flight is too precise an activity to go through the molting process. This is because when an insect gets its wings, it needs to pump hemolymph into them. Imagine a kite held together by floppy tubes. Now imagine filling those tubes full until the turgid kite is held stiff. The issue is that when insects do this and those tubes harden, they remain so even if the fluid is removed. They do this so that the kite stays in its perfect shape, because flight requires precision in its design. This precision, however, has locked insects off from forming wings at more than one stage in their life. It's the hardening, called sclerotization of the wings, which has locked insect flight into only being in the adult stage of insects. In evolutionary terms, it's also important to look at the practicality of the innovation. Even if insects could fly at other stages in their life, it is likely the case that it's not very helpful. Earwigs' wings are floppy and impractical, and although they can fly, they likely couldn't stand to have them at more stages in their life. The most common use for flight in insects is dispersal and reproduction. If wings are generally specialized for reproduction, it does not make sense to have them in immature stages. The key point is that achieving flight is a series of trade-offs, and thus insects have collectively remained efficient flyers, but only as adults, rather than as larvae or nymphs. Dragonflies and mayflies are the oldest extant winged insects, and there remains debate as to which came first. What is known is the niches these two groups fill. Dragonflies are definitively the most precise flyers among insects. They've been flying for a longer time than just about any other insect group, save for mayflies, and have the most complicated wing structures and flight behaviors. You may be asking, how does such an old group become an apex predator? Because indeed they are a cosmopolitan species that dominate in the aerial niche. Well, the answer is twofold. First, their primitive wings have given them special privileges. We call their wings primitive because they don't fold over their body to the extent that other insects do, like wasps and flies. In fact, damselflies only somewhat fold their wings behind them, and dragonflies never do. This is because they have what's called direct flight, and all of their wings are dexterous and articulate and able to move independently of one another, which is a unique feature among insects. This allows the dragonfly to fly in a myriad more complicated and efficient ways. They use this to flap their hind wings asymmetrically to their forewings, which is a unique feature that allows them to hover and fly in just about any direction. Here's a visual reference to show the literal categorical difference in how insects with direct flight fly versus insects with indirect flight. The dragonfly flies effortlessly in 3D space, moving up, down, left, right, forward, and backward fluidly like a drone. Whereas flies and wasps and practically all other insects have momentum when they fly and cannot turn in the air fluidly like dragonflies. Most insects are unable to even fly backwards or straight up and down. Dragonflies can afford to move this efficiently because they've simultaneously occupied and stolen the niche which supports this high energy type of flight. They can support this because they have a 95% hunting success rate, one of the highest in the animal kingdom. This is important because 95% of insects can fly, and dragonflies and damselflies are better at flying than 100% of them. Insects with indirect flight have wings that can only be moved simultaneously, like human eyes, due to a different muscle attachment. The benefits of indirect flight is that it's more energy efficient and less complicated for the insect to control. However, aerial maneuverability becomes compromised. Therefore, the bottom line of the dragonfly's niche in flight becomes this: I must sacrifice the energy I would save from having indirect flight so that I can at the same time be better at flying and better at catching food sources than any other insect while flying. They've retained a more primitive form of flight and perfected its strong points to become exclusively predatory insects. They quite literally have retained relevance by climbing to the top of the ladder early and pushing it out from underneath, so that no other insect has direct flight control. Having said all this, there's still room for other apex aerial predators in the insect kingdom. Some of these include robber flies, wasps, scorpion flies, and certain species from the Neuroptera. However, quite literally none of these predators hunt completely in midair. They either have to perch and then ambush, or stop flying altogether when they grab the insect they are hunting. Dragonflies actually continue flying as they hunt, whereas indirect flight makes this impossible for other insects to accomplish. The second key feature of dragonflies that affects their ecology is an interesting feature that both ensures their ability to fly so well and perhaps limits their geographic range. This feature is that in the first stage of their lives they are aquatic, which is why they are typically only found around freshwater, like swamps, rivers, and wetlands. They are even more voracious as predators in their aquatic stage, and use a method of sitting and waiting similar to a mantis, only instead of using a mantis's raptorial claws, they use their mouth parts, specifically a highly specialized lower labium, which is hydraulically powered. Having an aquatic larval stage is extremely synergistically efficient with having a predatory adult stage. This is because, in general, when looking at the entire nutrient distribution, freshwater ecosystems are more conducive to predators than herbivores when comparing them to terrestrial forested ecosystems, which are the opposite, and where the flying adults live. This is because in forests, despite there being more nutrients overall, they are locked up in massive trees and only slowly re-enter the system when plants die or shed their leaves. In freshwater ecosystems, nutrients are more immediately available because water is constantly redistributing organic matter. This is why and how most insects that begin their lives exclusively in freshwater and are also predators are able to become larger as adults, such as megalopterans, stoneflies, giant water bugs, and some beetles. Knowing this, however, the only one of these that both gains wings as an adult and hunts are dragonflies. The one limitation here is that dragonflies must remain around areas with water in order to reproduce effectively. They can disperse with ease, but they might be less common farther inland than other insects. They are practically non-existent in deserts and places very far inland, unless they are migrating, which they've been known to do over hundreds or thousands of miles. In fact, the globe skimmer holds the record for the longest insect migration, traveling up to 18,000 kilometers, longer even than monarch butterflies, whose journey is only about 3,000 kilometers. To clarify, it's not one individual insect completing the journey, but a multi-generational overlap of many insects traveling a set amount of distance. Dragonfly nymphs move through the water through the use of hydraulics. They intake water into a specialized cavity in their abdomen called a rectal chamber, and then forcefully expel it to produce effective locomotion. This allows them to keep their legs small and designed for grasping prey as opposed to swimming, thus saving energy. Dragonfly adult legs are small but very strong. They are spiny, hook-like legs that form a sort of basket when they extend them forward. This allows them to snatch up prey effectively, which they then proceed to consume alive. The jaws they use to achieve this are hardcore and grind and crush in a side-to-side motion, ensuring that the insect is consumed aggressively and quickly. Other insects like mantises and robberflies take their time to either drain the insect or chew it slowly, but the dragonfly wastes no time. This is because, although their legs are strong, they are not as strong as a mantis's claws or a robberfly's legs, and so they need to quickly kill and eat whatever they catch, lest it escape. This is not a problem for a mantis, which can hold the larger prey and take its time eating it. In conclusion, the order Odonata is quite unique. Indeed, no other insect in the animal kingdom has the ergonomic efficiency where they have the privilege to have their wings be so massive, complex, and in your face like a dragonfly does. They are colorful and primitive because they can afford to be, due to their unparalleled hunting and flying ability among insects. This is the 6th episode in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This video will cover stoneflies from the order Plecoptera, which is a surprisingly unique group of insects. Plecoptera comes from the Greek plekein, meaning to twist or braid, and ptera, meaning wings. Thus their name means braided wings, in reference to the complex veins on their wings. These insects are not strong flyers, however, and typically only do so to disperse and find mates effectively. Because of this, they do not eat as adults, except maybe a bit of water or nectar. Similarly to mayflies, these insects spend the majority of their lives underwater. Their larval form or nymph form is entirely aquatic, and they're the only order where this is universal for the entire group. The adults of this order have 2 pairs of membranous wings held flat over their abdomen when at rest. Their hind wings are broader and pleated. They are in the group Neoptera, meaning that their wings can fold over their body. They are among the first insects to have this feature in evolutionary history. Their antennae are filiform or thread-like and often quite long, used for sniffing out food and mates. They have legs with simple tarsi or claws, which are suited to cling to rocks in fast-flowing streams. The nymphs of this order can molt many times, with some species able to molt up to 36 times before adulthood. They eat decaying plant matter as nymphs, algae, biofilms, and even small aquatic invertebrates, especially in their later molts. The adults eat little to nothing, sometimes a little pollen or nectar, but that's about it. They're eaten by fish, amphibians, dragonfly larvae, and other predatory vertebrates and invertebrates. They are a key food source for many aquatic animals, which is why they are often used as fishing bait, or a facsimile of them is used. These insects reproduce through drumming. The males and females communicate by tapping their abdomens against surfaces to create vibrations, which can then be picked up by their 2 posterior cerci, similarly to silverfish. The male initiates and the female responds, leading to a back and forth exchange until they locate each other. After fertilization, the females carry the eggs in their abdomen for a short period. When they're ready and they've found a suitable location, they drop their eggs from the air into the water's surface, or even submerge their abdomens to stick the eggs directly underwater. The eggs are often sticky to prevent them from washing away, and to keep them in the correct environment. The eggs hatch into the aquatic nymphs after a few weeks or months, and then, over several months to a few years, they molt multiple times before becoming winged adults. Once mature, they'll crawl into land, become winged adults, and begin the cycle anew. The adults only last a few days to a few weeks. These insects are distinguished because they are one of 3 orders in the Neoptera, that is, insects which can fold their wings flat over their bodies, which have primarily aquatic larvae. The other 2 are Megaloptera and Trichoptera, and of these 3, they are the only ones that don't undergo complete metamorphosis, meaning they don't form a cocoon or pupa, and their young look like smaller versions of themselves. Here are the insects with complete metamorphosis, and here are the ones with incomplete metamorphosis. So to reiterate, these insects are the only ones that have these 3 traits. 1. Their larvae are typically aquatic in most species. 2. Insects which can fold their wings flat over their bodies. And 3. They undergo incomplete metamorphosis, as opposed to complete metamorphosis. So, what do these 3 things in conjunction award the stonefly? What do these 3 things get the insect that no other insect can attest to? Why does this strategy work? Well, let's compare and contrast them to the insect order most similar to them, being mayflies. There are 4 key differences between these 2 insect groups that will help to elucidate just how stoneflies survive. The first is that they live longer lives than mayflies, both in their aquatic and adult stage. The second is that because of this longer lifespan, Mayfly adults are designed to be somewhat disposable, as are their wings, whereas Stonefly wings are a bit more ergonomic, although they are still bad flyers. Their better wings help to disguise them and are more suited to their longer adult stage. They need this difference in adult stage and this difference in wings because of the difference in their reproductive strategies. The Mayfly strategy is to emerge in numbers so great and so sudden that they cannot possibly be preyed upon enough to stop them from successfully reproducing the next generation. In contrast, Stoneflies will take their time to find the correct mate, do it safely, and then effectively find a spot to lay their eggs that will ensure their young's survival. The Mayfly simply lays its eggs where it's most convenient, as there's no time to be picky. Lifespan, wings, and mating strategy all play into the fourth thing, which is how the insects breathe. There are two methods of breathing underwater among insects. One is using what fish use, which is gills, but unlike fish and mammals, insect breathing is passive. This means that they don't actually breathe in or suck in water to breathe like fish or mammals. Instead, they allow the water or air to diffuse directly into their bodies through an open respiratory system, or tracheal system. Insects actively allow water to flow into this tracheal system, and when they have gills, that's just an extension of that tracheal system. Because of this, they only typically have them in environments with poor oxygen quality, as they can wave or flail them manually to collect oxygen from the water. However, in certain environments such as fast-flowing oxygen-rich water, gills just kind of get in the way and are not necessary to collect oxygen. This means that depending on the circumstances of the water in their environment, aquatic insects may or may not possess gills. To clarify, gills are basically an add-on to what's called cutinous respiration. In Mayfly nymphs, the two happen concurrently. It's just a question of whether gills help in their given situation or not. Stoneflies breathe through cutinous respiration. The respiration of the stonefly is optimized for fast-running water, which is why they have strong claws and limbs, designed to hold onto the ground. They opportunistically scavenge whatever comes down the stream, sort of like mini grizzly bears waiting for the salmon to come by. These insects are effective at sitting and waiting for their meals to come to them. Mayflies are similar, but they differ as stated before, in that they have a much lower standard for what they will eat, and much lower standards for where they will eat it. Because of this stonefly's high standard for water oxygen quality and food sources, it is one of the best insects to gauge water quality. Any degree of pollution can have major implications to these insects and the rivers they inhabit. As stated earlier, they selectively choose where to lay their eggs based on water quality. Before moving forward, it's important to distinguish the 5 orders which are primarily aquatic in their larval stage. This is so that we can figure out exactly where the stonefly fits in to these exclusive orders. These 5 orders are Odonata, or dragonflies, Ephemeroptera, or mayflies, Plecoptera, or stoneflies, Megaloptera, or fishflies or dobsonflies, and lastly, Trichoptera, or caddisflies. Here are these 5 orders ranked in which ones need the most oxygen to survive, that is the lowest tolerance for low oxygen levels, and which have the highest tolerance for low oxygen levels. Dragonflies survive the best because they can actually input and then expel water, which they use for locomotion. They breathe as they're doing this, and so don't actually passively breathe like other insects. The rest of these insects are adapted specifically for either gill breathing or cutinous respiration, however, with plecopterans being the most reliant. Cutinous respiration works across the entire body, which is why stonefly nymphs have very flat bodies with wide surface areas to maximize breathing efficiency. By not relying on gills, they become more maneuverable, more resistant to cold, and more metabolically efficient. However, only in the very specific environments where oxygen is constantly passing over the insect. What this means is that their adaptations are effective and adapted to their niche, but only in a very specific circumstance. This is why they're the only insect that relies so much on cuteness respiration. And also why their distribution is quite limited compared to the other insects. They survive because the niche exists, and they do it better than any other insect, but it comes at the cost of limited distribution. Only by retaining primitive traits can they survive better than their peers in very specific environments. This has been the key to their success, and it speaks to the specificity of niche differentiation among insects. The different adaptations of the mayfly and stonefly make it so that they coexist more than they compete directly for the food they consume. In a way, they are designed with this in mind, in that they are designed for the specific food sources in the specific areas that they go after, and also are designed as opposed to each other. In other words, the areas they live, what they eat, and the existence of each other has created the evolutionary pressures that have influenced them into coexisting. This is the 8th episode in a 30-part series providing an ecological overview of the insect orders. This episode will cover earwigs, insects of the order Dermaptera. This is an order with a surprising amount of depth and beauty. Before we begin, we need to understand these insects do not actively crawl in ears despite their common name. The name actually originates from the myth, but I can assure you that there's no credibility to it. That being said, these insects do like to enter dark, moist, cave-like areas similar to human ears, which may have caused the myth, when it maybe happened once or twice a few hundred years ago. However, there have been no known cases of earwigs causing ear damage, so you have nothing to worry about. These insects exist worldwide, except for the continent of Antarctica. Their largest representative has actually gone extinct in the last 100 years due to human influence through habitat destruction and pest introduction. It was the St. Helena earwig, found only on the island of St. Helena, and it could grow up to 8 centimeters in length. These insects don't get very big, which is partly why they need such intimidating large forceps to dissuade predators. These insects are very old in evolutionary history, although not quite as old as cockroaches. The strong grasping forceps of the earwigs have existed for 200 million years, quite unchanged. The order name of earwigs is Dermaptera, which comes from the Greek words derma, meaning skin, and ptera, meaning wings, loosely translating to skin wings. This refers to the leathery, often hardened forewings, or tegmina, that protect the hindwings, a feature many of the Neoptera possess. This may seem similar to beetles, but it's different, because the beetle's elytra covers the entire body. Though earwigs possess functional wings, most are poor flyers and prefer to scuttle along the ground. They are primarily nocturnal and exhibit behaviors uncommon among other insects, including maternal care. These insects are generalists, similar to cockroaches, but there are a few key differences of note which have shaped them differently. Number 1, diet. Cockroaches will eat just about anything, whereas earwigs are quite a bit more picky. Both insects will eat plant matter, animal matter, and are considered omnivores, detritivores, and a whole host of other things. But when it's coming down to exactly what they can eat, Cockroaches have a greater microbiome and thus can eat more things. Number 2. Cockroaches can live in many environments, whereas earwigs prefer humid, secluded places where they can hide. Both like places they can hide, but cockroaches tend to move around a lot, whereas earwigs stay in the same spot until the food runs out. Number 3. Cockroaches reproduce quickly and excessively, whereas earwigs are more modest in their reproduction, but actually exhibit parental care and will do so until the young are ready to go off on their own. Cockroaches sometimes exhibit parental care, but other times not at all, and some species will even cannibalize their own young. There is a lot of variation, and it is very species dependent with regards to parental care, so keep that in mind going forward. Number 4. Cockroaches are tough and often larger than earwigs, but they are not fighters and will run away should conflict arise. Earwigs are quite a bit more tougher and will fight back using their posterior forceps if need be. Basically, cockroaches are better at being nomadic, opportunistic generalists, whereas earwigs are better at maintaining the environment they are already in. Among generalists, cockroaches are the squatters who are always late on rent and will leave you if you threaten to call the police. Earwigs are the well-meaning tenants that actually furnish the place and make it a home. Cockroaches feed, reproduce, and then run away. Earwigs hunker down, raise a family, and then fight to protect them. Now let's look at some general internal and external anatomy features. On the external anatomy, perhaps the most distinguishing characteristic of earwigs is their large pincer-like cerci at the rear of their abdomen. These are sexually dimorphic. Males tend to have curved, larger cerci, while females have straight ones. These structures serve multiple purposes, including defense, prey capture, and mating interactions. They often use them to fight other males for territory, and they're also used for defense as much as they are offense. The tegmina of the earwig, or hardened forewings, unlike beetles, whose elytra fully encases the hindwings, earwigs have short, leathery tegmina that partially cover their folded hindwings. Beetles possess their elytra primarily for defense. Tegmina are also for defense, but they are noticeably smaller and more flexible, meant more to protect the wings than the entire length of the body, as in most beetles. Under these tegmina, earwigs possess intricate fan-like hind wings. These wings can unfurl to nearly 10 times their surface area when extended, but they are rarely used, as earwigs generally want to stay where they are. Earwigs have thread-like antennae, which are generally long and segmented, and these aid in sensing humidity and other environmental cues. Lastly, their long, elongated, flexible bodies are adapted for maneuverability in tight spaces, such as bark crevices and leaf litter. The internal anatomy of the earwig is similar to a cockroach's, but different. Depending on the species, earwigs may be herbivorous, omnivorous, or predatory, and many consume detritus, fungi, plant matter, and small invertebrates, and it all depends on what microhabitat they're suited for. So, now that we know all this, what eats earwigs? Well, despite their formidable cerci, they're preyed upon by a variety of organisms, including birds, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and other arthropods. By being generalist insects, they exist in many environments, and so compete with other insects and arthropods for food and shelter, especially in humid microhabitats, such as leaf litter, under bark, and in soil crevices. Despite this, their unique evolutionary traits have kept them relevant, as they are in somewhat of an awkward spot. They need to compete with isopods, cockroaches, ants, and other ground-dwelling arthropods by being selective with what they eat, selective with where they live, and ready to know when to fight and when to nurture. Here are several unique characteristics earwigs possess in this effort. Number 1. Maternal care. As stated before, earwigs are among the few non-social insects that provide parental care. Females lay eggs in underground burrows and guard them against predators, fungi, and desiccation. Even after hatching, nymphs remain under the mother's protection for several molts, being fed regurgitated food in some species. She will not hunt food and bring it back in solid form, however. She will simply regurgitate it, similar to a penguin. This maternal care that extends not just past the eggs, but even to after the young hatch, and even until they are adult enough to fend for themselves, is something truly unique to earwigs, and is likely the most advanced form of parental care, apart from eusociality, found in the insect kingdom. Number 2. Their forceps-like cerci are often used to ward predators, grasp prey, and engage in mating displays or competition. These are multifaceted tools and are useful not just because of the strength of their pinch, but their sheer size and intimidation factor. They get larger and more gnarly looking after each molt in relation to body size. Thus, the larger the earwig is, the more intimidating the forceps. Lastly, their folded hindwings, despite being used rarely, are some of the most intricately folded wings in the insect world, which is a feature that allows them to maintain their streamlined body shape. They have them like this specifically because they don't use them very often, and most of the time they get in the way when the earwig is trying to squeeze in and out of tight spaces, which it often does. These wings are spring-loaded, and they don't fold because of inherent musculature. That is, no muscle actively folds and unfolds them like in other insects. Rather, they are pleated, and the memory of the fold is enough for them to retain their shape properly. This is quite literally the same as origami. One more additional note is that most earwigs are nocturnal. This is to avoid predators, avoid drying out, and aid in scavenging behavior. Earwigs are essential players in many ecosystems, particularly due to their feeding habits. Their presence helps regulate populations of smaller invertebrates, while also contributing to decomposition and nutrient cycling. These are the types of microhabitats they usually live in, which, unlike cockroaches, they won't typically leave until the food runs out or some other catastrophe occurs, which is usually when their wings come out. So, where do earwigs fit in among insects? You wouldn't think it, because earwigs are generally much less reviled than cockroaches, but they pretty much do almost exactly the same thing. The only key difference is that earwigs are optimized to be territorial, whereas cockroaches are optimized to be nomadic. This one seemingly small change actually makes all the difference in the world with these generalists, and has translated to all the adaptations you see in both of these groups today. Earwigs approach survival in an intuitive, risk-averse way, and even have a few surprises up their sleeves. I personally love these insects, as to me they feel like effective and satisfied product design. Everything from their colors to their iconic shape. The story of this insect just makes sense. It is one of the insect kingdom's most practical designs, both in mechanics and behaviors. They are truly a special insect if you take a close-up look. Thanks for watching this episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Be sure to stay tuned for more bug content. Thanks. This is the 9th episode in a 30-part series analyzing the insect orders. Angel insects, or the order Zooptera, are a quirky and largely unknown order of insects, and they want to keep it that way. These insects are tiny and form large, but not too large, social congregations within rotting wood. This video won't contain any Zoopteran footage, as I truly couldn't find any online, which should speak to their mysterious, quiet nature. The name Zooptera comes from the ancient Greek Zoros meaning pure or undiluted, and Aptera meaning wingless. This name is something of a misnomer, as it translates to pure wing, which is in reference to the notion that these insects do not possess wings, but that's factually incorrect. These insects do possess wings, but only in certain contexts, in which their bodies sense that they will need to disperse at some point in their lives. Therefore, only some are born with wings. What this means is that some generations will eventually develop wings and some will not, depending on food availability. They were named before this fact was discovered, however, so their name has not been changed since. Despite this, their common name is more accurate, being angel insects. These insects are in an interesting spot when looked at through an ecological context. They form loose congregations, but are not nomadic, and they are very small and don't really fight back, although they do sometimes prey upon things smaller than they are. The evolutionary timeline is tricky with these guys, but their most close relatives are likely earwigs or termites, cockroaches, and mantises. But they are not direct descendants of any of these, and their evolutionary history remains dubious, even being linked to the order Hemiptera in some cases. These insects are different from all these orders, however, as they are distinctly specialized in their diet, similar to many termite species. They exist in a very fine line of niche differentiation, and still today they remain an enigmatic and understudied group of insects. Therefore, the following key traits that I'm about to discuss could still possess survival advantages that are altogether unknown. Let's get started. Number 1. Microhabitat specialization. Similarly to earwigs and termites, they exploit microhabitats, primarily decaying wood, leaf litter, and soil pockets. They do this with precision, maintaining populations in spaces that are too variable or temporary for long-term investment from earwigs or cockroaches. Number 2. Social coordination. While not eusocial, that is, colony forming, their aggregations suggest some level of cooperative advantage, particularly in selecting and maintaining habitable sites. It is speculative how congregating can help these insects, but some theories might include that it may assist them in better locating where their preferred resources are, as well as when it might be a good time to leave due to a lack of numbers and resources. Number 3. Minimal competitive overlap. Their small size and preference for highly localized transient habitats reduces direct competition with other insects such as cockroaches, which tend to be more mobile and opportunistic. Not much research has been done with regard to how quickly they colonize recently rotting wood, but such research could help to elucidate more truths as to the reasoning behind the success of these detritivores as opposed to other insects, as the niche is already quite full. Number 4. Selective dispersal. Rather than having frequent migrations, they rely on periodic dispersal during generational shifts, allowing them to avoid exhaustion of resources while maintaining a stronghold where conditions are ideal. When they're born to develop wings, they are pigmented differently and also develop eyes, likely a survival strategy to better camouflage and disperse with ease. This helps because wings are prone to damage under wood, and the ability to create wings only when the time is right through epigenetic shifts is something only eusocial insect colonies have been known to effectively utilize. While epigenetic regulation of caste differentiation is well established among eusocial insects, where environmental factors influence whether an individual becomes a queen or a worker, such mechanisms are less understood in non-social species. This suggests that Zoraptor's use of epigenetic pathways for adaptive morphological changes is uncommon and truly unique to them, although other insects might show something similar. Here's a chart showing the most similar orders that it's thought Earwig are most related to. As you can see, the only one that possesses all 4 traits, although it possesses them differently, is Ecological, or termites. Therefore, due to their similarity, it would be prudent to compare these 2 groups to figure out exactly how Earwigans survive. In essence, Earwigans have carved out a niche that exists within a delicate balance, and their traits mimic those of the Ecological more than any other insect. Indeed, they exist in similar habitats, but in actuality, their feeding strategies are not the same. Termites work for their living, feeding on wood or cultivated fungus galleries, acting altruistically with each other to go out and collect the best possible food sources to support their large colonies. This is what they're adapted to. Earwigans are also adapted to go after strong food sources, but they are not adapted to be doing any extra work, which in my opinion is what's limiting their size. Other detritivores need complicated strategies in order to both not be hunted and effectively obtain resources. And for Earwigans, this means being tiny enough to hide under wood, as well as showing up in great enough numbers in the right place at the right time in order to maximize their chances. Unlike termites, every Earwigan can breed, so they can better manage such an economically risky strategy. In addition, the males compete for mating rights, similarly to termites, and in this way still reap the benefits of genetic fitness that this brings. It appears that the story of these insects is very much the story of how insects have evolved to take advantage of forest ecosystems and the wood it provides. The nutrients of flora are locked up in massive trees, which is something I discussed in earlier videos. And in order to take advantage of these hard-to-obtain resources, insects have had to evolve very specific or situational adaptations due to the nature of the resource itself. To finish my point, the order Earwig capitalize on this niche by being the best at 2 specific things. 1, being undetectable, and 2, effective dispersal, 2 things termites typically struggle with. Termite colonies die when the food runs out, relying on the reproductives to go off and start somewhere else, whereas Earwigans rely on food running out for it to signal them that it's time to leave. They effectively do the termite strategy in a way that termites can't manage, as they have responsibilities at home. In effect, they invert what might be considered an extremely stable and successful niche, but perhaps at the cost of a degree of charisma, for most people don't know that they exist, and the people that do didn't name them correctly. To put it in the most simple terms, Earwigans thrive in the places where eusocial congregation in wood is actually somewhat too risky, and a more lax and risk-averse strategy is key. The 2 groups can overlap quite an amount, but they coexist just fine due to a difference in feeding habits, and also the fact that Earwigans are faster to arrive at a new location. From all this, we can see sort of how Earwigans have survived despite all the competition, but there's still research to be made, and this video will be fairly incomplete in an ecological context. These are simply my best deductions from the information I researched. Thanks for watching this shorter episode of Privilege Bug Facts. The episode was short because this group, as I mentioned, is understudied. Hopefully in the future, more can be ascertained about this strange, phantasmal group. Thanks for watching. This is the 7th of a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This episode will be looking at Orthoptera, which includes grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. These insects are some of the most recognizable and ecologically significant terrestrial arthropods, known for their powerful jumping legs, their ability to produce sound, and their role as both herbivores and prey in ecosystems worldwide. Culturally and historically, these are some of the most impactful insects, as locusts have wrought literally biblical devastation on agricultural operations. In fact, the Rocky Mountain locust used to exist within the United States and Canada, but the wisdom and ambition of the American people wiped them out entirely in order to protect the vast agricultural lands of Middle America. This is fascinating to think about when considering the largest accumulation of these insects ever recorded was estimated to weigh upwards of 27.5 million tons and consist of 12.5 trillion individual insects. This is considered the greatest concentration of animals ever recorded, according to Guinness World Records. Despite this, 30 years later, in 1902, the species was extinct due to forced government pest control. The government would fine any man from the age 16 to 60 $10, or the equivalent of $312 adjusted for inflation, and would offer a $31 reward for every bushel of these insects collected. This, in conjunction with plowing and irrigation of the soil in which the locusts laid their eggs, eventually caused the complete eradication of the insects. This is because the areas which were plowed and irrigated overlapped with the breeding grounds of these insects, which was actually quite limited. I tell this story because it's a microcosm for the impact and legacy of these insects. And it's illuminating to understanding just what niche these insects dominate. A distinct combination of effective locomotion and a generalist vegetarian diet have synergized to make this order a force to be reckoned with that actively shapes terrestrial environments. The name Orthoptera comes from the Greek ortho, meaning straight, and ptera, meaning wings, referencing their leathery, straight forewings, or tegmina. These insects are distinguished by their ability to produce sound and their highly adapted legs, designed for jumping. Orthoptera are primarily terrestrial, but they're often found in grasslands, forests, and even deserts. They are key players in food webs, both as primary consumers and as food for birds, reptiles, and other arthropods. Crickets and katydids have long filamentous antennae, whereas grasshoppers have shorter beaded ones. This is usually the best way to tell the difference between them. In addition, Orthoptera have strong, chewing mouthparts adapted for plant material. Grasshoppers are overwhelmingly herbivorous. Crickets are generalist omnivores, and katydids are picky herbivores that go for high-quality foods like fruits and fresh leaves, typically in dense jungles or forests. These insects have tympanal organs, or hearing structures, found on the abdomen, on grasshoppers, and on the forelegs in crickets and katydids. Orthopterans attract females through stridulation, which is rubbing wings or legs together to produce sound. Some katydids and crickets use pheromones in addition to this, and in some species, males engage in territorial fights to secure mates. Females use a specialized ovipositor to deposit their eggs into soil, plant stems, or leaf litter, depending on the species. Some grasshoppers lay eggs in pods, covering them in a frothy secretion that hardens for protection, similarly to the ootheca of a mantis. The eggs then overwinter before hatching into nymphs. Nymphs resemble small, wingless adults and undergo multiple molts before becoming adults. They gradually develop wings and reproductive organs, reaching adulthood in a few weeks to months. The Orthoptera have three key adaptations that set them apart from many other insect orders. The first is their jumping locomotion. Unlike most insects which rely solely on flight, and although most orthopterans still possess wings, Orthoptera have powerful hind legs that allow them to evade predators without taking to the air, and unlike wings, they have these as soon as they're born. The second is acoustic communication. Many species use sound for mate attraction and territorial displays. This is a rare trait among insects, at least rare to have on such a wide scale. This is because ears with which to listen are often not super important in the lives of most insects. They use this sound to announce their territory, intimidate predators, and attract mates, similarly to cicadas. The third thing is incomplete metamorphosis. Unlike insects with complete metamorphosis, such as butterflies, Orthoptera nymphs resemble miniature adults and develop gradually without a pupal stage. This is a key reason why they have the two previous mentioned abilities, as such effective locomotion and sound would be impossible for insect babies of complete metamorphosis. These three traits have allowed them to exploit terrestrial environments in ways few other insect orders could have. They are adapted for energy-efficient movement. Where do the Orthoptera fit into the insect world? As stated earlier, the grasshopper's jumping ability, in conjunction with their generalist herbivore diet, makes them sort of like the cows of the insect world. They can exist because they are adapted to take advantage of the sheer amount of variety and mass of plant material found on land. They have tough chewing mouthparts and can also digest most forms of plant matter. The diversity of the group speaks to the myriad strategies of generalized plant consumption there are, but not necessarily the amount of variety found in the plants and fungi. Specialized microhabitat insects, such as hemipterans and beetles, would be far more appropriate for this. Like cockroaches, Orthoptera are typically nomadic, and crickets are honestly very similar to cockroaches, but the jumping legs of the Orthoptera, along with their ability to make sound, means that crickets can be a bit more out on the open than cockroaches, and thus the niche is differentiated. Some crickets live in caves or underground, where they use their powerful or exaggerated limbs for digging and/or enhanced jumping and tactile sensation, unlike cockroaches. I call these insects the cows of the insect world because they are built to maximize their ability of being out on the open. That is, they are adapted to be able to simply go out and start eating what they want to, whilst maximizing their chances of avoiding predation, either through their size or defensive tactics. This is why and how they can typically grow pretty large for insects, and also why you often see them in great numbers in places with dense vegetation. That is where they are designed to be, as the rewards of their lifestyle are high and the risk is minimized by their sheer maneuverability and acrobatics. Orthoptera, especially locusts and grasshoppers, can drastically shape plant communities. They influence plant succession by selectively consuming certain species, often suppressing dominant plants and allowing less competitive ones to thrive. This strategy is obviously not without its risks, as adapting yourself to getting away with standing out means that you're going to come at odds quite often with predators. These insects are a key prey source for birds, mammals, reptiles, and many other invertebrates. Certain species of wasps specialize as parasitoids, specifically of just one or more species of Orthoptera. Because of their ergonomic jumping design, these insects seem to have reached the evolutionary pinnacle of herbivory in insects that stand out. This is why their strength in numbers strategy that cicadas often employ has been taken to such extremes in locusts. In addition, because their food sources are so interlinked with climate and weather patterns, these insects are adapted to be able to detect humidity and other suitable conditions for plant growth, which is part of how locusts know when to swarm, and also why Orthoptera are particularly susceptible to the effects of climate change. They are so generalized and sensitive to these things that climate change affects them in more myriad different ways, as these are not particularly microhabitat specialists. They eat lots of different kinds of plants. Indeed, these insects are perfectly adapted herbivores that are likely the oldest terrestrial winged order, save for cockroaches, and they've succeeded in this effort by co-evolving with terrestrial vegetation, likely being the first to do so with such efficiency. Thank you for watching this latest episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more order analyses and all other types of bug content. Thanks. This is the 13th episode in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview to the insect orders. This episode will be looking at the Grylloblatodea, or ice crawlers. Technically, these insects belong to the Notoptera, which is an order that also includes the gladiator bugs, or Mantophasmatodea, which are very morphologically similar, but due to the specificity of the Grylloblatodea, I've decided to separate the two orders for this series. Both groups are extremophiles, but Mantophasmatodea is an extremophile for the heat and more desert arid environments, whereas ice crawlers aptly are designed for cold, frigid environments. The name Grylloblatodea was coined in 1914 when the scientists who discovered them couldn't quite pin down what they were. So they combined three other insect groups for their name. Specifically, the genus name for field crickets, Gryllus, the order name of cockroaches, Blatodea, and Campodea, which is a hexapod commonly referred to as a two-pronged bristletail. You can see how ice crawlers seem to have some of the traits of all three groups all rolled into one, but also don't quite look exactly like any of them. The reality is, ice crawlers are extremely old, and their relative abstract morphology is due to the exclusivity of their nocturnal extremophile niche. Indeed, these insects only live in very cold locations, such as glaciers, caves, montane environments, and occasionally lower elevation forests. They are only typically found in North America and East and Central Asia. Within these niches, they are omnivorous scavengers who will consume detritus and corpses among the frosty wasteland. These insects can live up to 7 years, and their entire lives are done very slowly, with mating that can last for hours, and eggs that can sometimes take years to hatch. This is partly due to the passivity and relative stability of their frigid environments. Here are all the reasons they can survive in places colder than most other insects. Number 1. The liquid in their bodies has a supercooling point of negative 3.9 degrees Celsius, lower than any other insect, meaning that the temperature at which they will naturally freeze is far lower than any other insect. Number 2. They typically try to spend their time under rocks or snowpack, where temperatures are more stable and regular, and thus to their liking. This is likely why they don't possess ocelli, or light-sensing eyes, and they also don't possess wings. They are designed to be relatively subterranean, and when temperatures are an inconvenient flux, they can just hide underground. So they don't really need to know when the sun is out, because their lives are more controlled by their general sense of temperature rather than anything else. It's more than being able to sense the sun's heat than see its rays, which makes them nocturnal, or able to be nocturnal. This strategy might seem effective, but ice crawlers are actually walking an extremely thin line. These insects are the only order known that is exclusively nocturnal, and in addition, because they stay warm by literally having blood that doesn't freeze easy, they actually have to purge their gut before winter to reduce nucleation points, that is, where ice can start forming. and if the environment suddenly gets too cold too fast, they'll die. Their particular method of preventing ice crystals from forming, called supercooling, is a tightrope walk of extremity. If it gets too warm or too cold, these insects will die, and the margins aren't very good. They survive in an optimal temperature range of about 0 to 5 degrees Celsius. 5 to 10 degrees Celsius and -4 to -8 degrees Celsius is the danger zone for these insects, and they are unlikely to survive. If the temperature gets over 10 degrees or below -8 degrees, they will cook or freeze to death, respectively, which means that even handling these insects for extended periods can kill them. Now remember, all insects are cold-blooded, but most other not specialized insects die at around 40 degrees Celsius and lows of 0 to 5 degrees Celsius. Ice crawlers are still quite unique among insects that can survive in frigid environments because they are designed for longevity and stability within these environments that are actually not very adaptable in the traditional sense. What I mean is that they can live in the cold and nowhere else, whereas most other cold specialists can live in the cold and in the warmth. The key strategic difference is that ice crawlers avoid freezing entirely, whereas other insects would produce antifreeze or some other mechanisms so that when freezing happens, they have something to fight it. Most other insects survive despite how cold it is outside, but ice crawlers survive because it's so cold outside. Thus, the niche is differentiated and stable, however difficult to maintain effectively, and scarcely available with just a few stable habitats. Due to these limitations, only about 34 species are known across 5 genera. Some species in North America are known only from very specific sites, such as Grilloblata oregonensis, which only lives in Oregon Caves National Monument and Preserve. These insects are at a particular risk from climate change due to their reliance on stable locations and their limited ability to disperse due to a lack of wings. Indeed, these insects set up camp in the cold and never leave, and are extremely limited and rare as a result, although the niche remains relatively stable. Ice crawlers are a phantasmal and special order of insects, which speak to the specificity and fragility of adaptation and niche, and the lengths and risks the animal kingdom will take in its endless competition for survival. Thank you for watching this episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more content just like this. Thanks. This is the 14th episode in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This episode will be looking at Mantophasmatidae, or the gladiator bugs, a relict and extremely rare and mysterious group. This group is actually the most recent insect order to be discovered, although specimens were caught and archived in collections as early as 1909. However, they were not formally named or catalogued, and thus were effectively new to science in the year 2002. We had created flight, split the atom, and sequenced the entire human genome before we properly discovered these insects. How can this be? Well, the last insect order to be described before this one was the Grilloblatoidea, or ice crawlers, who Mantophasmids are actually quite related to. However, the ice crawlers were formerly named in 1912, meaning that it took 90 years to get around to gladiators, likely because they looked too similar to grasshopper nymphs or some other bugs. This means that these insects evaded detection literally because they were too morphologically generic. As we already had them in collections, we just didn't know what they were, and didn't seem to care because we thought they were something else. It's likely the case the taxonomists were also assured that there were no orders left to discover due to the large gap between these discoveries, and so they weren't looking. The last piece is that this order is indeed the smallest, containing only about 20 known species. In addition, the range of these insects is extremely limited. They are the only insect order restricted to one continent, Africa, and of that continent they are restricted to only about 2 or 3 countries, being South Africa, Namibia, and Tanzania. And in those countries, they aren't very common, restricted to a very small habitat, such as rocky savannas or shrublands. Obviously, of the 30 insect orders, this is by far the most limited range of any major group. But before going forward, let's define the term order better. The term order is a taxonomic rank used to group species that share common characteristics and evolutionary traits. Order is one of the higher levels in the hierarchical system of biological classification, falling between the class and family levels. With regards to insects, there are usually a few key features that an insect order contains that no other insect group can make claim to. Yet, every individual in that order has those features in one form or another, like the elytra and hindwing combo found in beetles, or the 2 wings and 2 halteres found in flies. There are 30 insect orders, roughly. But what differentiates mantophasmids can be a bit trickier. Indeed, their name is literally a combination of the order names of Mantodea and Phasmatotea, which are mantises and stick insects, which they superficially resemble. What actually differentiates these insects is their behavior and simple but effective morphology, namely their complete lack of wings, which mantids and phasmids typically possess. Gladiator bugs are nocturnal ambush predators who walk on the heels of their legs to avoid making sounds before pouncing on their prey, like a tiger. It's not actually the foot, but rather an enlarged areolaum, which comes right before the foot. They are more active than mantises, who employ a sit-and-wait strategy, and instead actively patrol the desert ecosystem, looking for fresh kills. They move slowly and precisely through their ecosystem to ensure they remain undetected so they can conserve energy. They're often well camouflaged for the terrain of their preference. In addition, they are sensitive to the vibrations in the earth, which they use to sense prey, better facilitate how quiet they are, and even to find mates. The males and females will drum the earth to find each other, and when the males find the females, they will often stay copulating on their backs for a lengthy period of time. They'll ride with them as the female continues to hunt, and the males can actually starve if they do this for too long. But the question remains, why are these guys still around if they are so limited in range, and mantises seem to do what they do, only better, and they do it everywhere? Well, what it comes down to is that mantophasmids actually do what mantises do in environments they can't do it in. That is, rocky, desert-type ecosystems. In these ecosystems, flight is actually more of a risk than a benefit. In addition, mantises aren't built to move around a lot like mantophasmids because of their massive raptorial legs, so the niche becomes differentiated. But then, why is their range so limited? Indeed, they only live in the deserty type portions of South Africa and Namibia, and one species in Tanzania. Well, the reason is likely twofold. The first is that these guys have been outcompeted by other flying insects in desert environments worldwide. They used to be far more common, which is why they're called a relict group. But now, many other apex insect predators have stolen their niche and ran with it. A big reason for this is that mantophasmids are among the few insect orders which cannot fly. And so not only are they more likely to be outcompeted by insects that can, they can't disperse to new areas as easily. The second reason is that mantophasmids prefer cooler, rocky desert ecosystems. Deserts that are colder, in the way the Namib is cooler at night, are very rare, making up less than about 10% of all desert ecosystems. On top of this, the Namib is the oldest desert on Earth, and thus one of the oldest ecosystems, meaning the gladiator bug is not only ancient in its design, it's ancient in its behavior, as it's been doing what it's been doing in the same place since dinosaur times. Deserts actually change quite frequently in geological history, and so the fact that gladiator bugs are still holding on to this last piece of desert simply because it's the oldest and the only one left able to support them speaks to the specificity and importance of getting in early in evolution. Natural selection has to work with what it already has, which is why no birds have evolved back into dinosaurs, and why dinosaurs basically gatekept the megafauna niches from mammals. That is, before they were killed by a meteorite. The same principle is at work with gladiator bugs, as their lack of wings and the redundancy of their predator niche only works in the one habitat they still live in. And if it actually works in more than one habitat, they have no way of getting there because they are wingless. This has meant that they've only been able to survive so long because they've been around so long that there is still one tiny niche for them in a world teeming with millions of competing strategies. Thanks for watching this episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more bug content just like this. Thanks. This is the 16th episode in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This episode will be looking at the Phasmatodea, or stick insects, a well-known but actually fairly restricted and somewhat extremophile group that has far more complicated survival strategies than one might initially assume. The name Phasmatodea comes from the Greek roots phasma, meaning apparition, phantom, or ghost, and odea, meaning form or resembling. Therefore, Phasmatodea roughly translates to ghost-like or phantom-shaped, referring to how their camouflage abilities can keep them very well hidden. Indeed, the study of these insects is often hampered by our inability to spot them. Stick insects are quite specialized to their high in the canopy niche and have a whole bag of tricks to survive up there. Phasmids are quite restricted in their habitats, but they are found mostly worldwide, and in their ranges they typically only live in areas of dense vegetation, which they almost never want to leave. They love tropical rainforests and most other types of forests, especially those in Southeast Asia, Australia, and parts of South America, but will avoid open plains as well as wetlands and tundra. They don't live in tundras because they don't typically do that well with the cold, and swamps are not so conducive because the exoskeleton of phasmids is relatively thin to support their awkward shapes. They also don't do very well in fungal-ridden environments for the same reason. Another reason they don't live above water, such as you'd find in swamps, is that they lay their eggs straight onto the forest floor. They do this because, like the adults, resemble the flora of the ecosystem, specifically seeds. Many actually enlist ants to forage the seeds so that phasmids will have a safe underground anthill to gestate within. But both the awkward stick shape and the eggs of the phasmid speak to their major general life strategy: camouflage. The stick insect wants you to think that it's not a convenient snack. In fact, it would prefer if you have no idea what it is at all. Many other insects exhibit camouflage, but the stick insect is unique in that it has gone all in and has an enormous myriad of strategies towards this effort. Here are all the standout survival strategies I could discover about the stick insect, although I'm sure there are more. Number 1. Mimicry. Stick insects don't just mimic sticks perfectly, but also leaves, moss, lichen, among other flora types. And they can even mimic damaged leaves with bite marks or fungal infestations. Also, if caught, some will exhibit thanatosis or playing dead. Number 2. They don't just look like what they mimic, they act like it. Everyone has seen this meme of the stick insect trying to look like it's swaying in the wind, showing that the behavior is more instinctual than contextual. In addition, certain stick insects can do an intimidation display, similarly to mantids, but often with a few more steps. Some, but not all stick insects, have wings to help them disperse and escape, and they will even flare these colorful wings when they're intimidating predators. In a pinch, they will even try to kick their predators with their long gangly legs, and if a predator grabs that leg, the stick insect can often shed it, like a lizard's tail, especially if it's not yet an adult, as it can regrow it through metamorphosis. The legs themselves are often prehensile and are perfectly tailored to gripping the branches in the canopy. Number 3. Because these insects go through multiple molts, their young, although typically mimicking from birth, can mimic different plants in different stages, and often in totally different ways. That is, when they go through metamorphosis, stick insects have a set number of instars, and the first instar can be mimicking a totally different thing than the final stage or adult. Sometimes they even mimic other insects in their first instars and then mimic plants in their adult stage. Number 4. The stick insect can change color across its metamorphosis, but this is not like a chameleon. The color change is permanent and adapted to their environment. What this means is that the stick insect, as it molts time and time again, it can literally see the light in its environment, receive that as input, and then change its color to a darker or lighter shade to match its environment. Therefore, their camouflage is variable not just at the species level, but at the individual level, depending on the feedback of their environment. Number 5. Some stick insects have toxins, so that if you eat them, you're less likely to eat another, either because they actually are toxic, or they just taste terrible, or both. Number 6. Some can eject foul-smelling chemicals to dissuade predators. Number 7. These insects mate longer than almost any others, sometimes for up to 79 days at a time. This is not just for romance. This actually helps increase the survival of both, as it increases their toxic capabilities and also makes them less easy to grasp by predators, effectively doubling most, but not all, of their survival strategies. Number 8. Stick insects are usually nocturnal, and they're almost always slow-moving. This synergizes very effectively with their deception strategy. Now, these strategies are not all shared by every member, and there's much variation across species. And although many are very specialized to exactly what they are mimicking, they often just mimic one type of leaf, stick, or other plant. The stick insect's diet is usually specialized to match this, in that they only eat the plant that they mimic, and they only mimic the plant that they eat. Although some, especially invasive species, are generalist feeders, the majority of these insects are specialists on just one or a few more plant species, which is rare among the Polyneoptera, and should speak to the extreme level of adaptation these insects exhibit. Something interesting about these insects is that many of them have just as much specialization in their reproduction. Although there isn't too much study in this area, it's right now estimated that about 10 to 25% of the 3,000 known species of phasmid exhibit parthenogenesis. That is, they only reproduce using clonal females, no males at all. Some can only do this, or what's called are obligate to this, and others will only produce males some of the time, or what's called facultative, not needing fertilization of the two sexes, although there is variability. Parthenogenesis is not alien to most insects, but it is very rarely this common among all the species in an order. This speaks to how the phasmid's life strategy is both stable and efficient, because the pros of this reproductive style is that reproduction is expedited and often less resource intensive, but the cons are susceptibility to highly variable pests and disease within the environment. Since the phasmid strategy so effectively mitigates predators, and it's obligate to a very stable forest ecosystem, that only leaves really diseases as a selective pressure. Phasmids are often so specifically adapted, they appear almost comical, and indeed superficial. But in the insect kingdom, sometimes there's no better ticket to survival than superficiality, provided you can make the investment. Thanks for watching this cryptic episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more bug content just like this. Thanks. This is the 15th episode in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This episode will concern the web spinners, a hidden and unique order which combines social living with curated and manufactured silk gallery nests. This is a relatively small or restricted group that only lives in certain tropical and subtropical habitats. Only the males in this order have wings, and their bodies are characterized by having short limbs and specifically thick forelimbs which produce their silk. Their order name is Hemiptera, and it was originally Embedina, but Hemiptera comes from the Greek embios, meaning lively, and pteron, meaning wing. However, the original meaning, based on the root of the word, means stepping wings, or those with wings that go in. The original name Embedina is more Greek for the bugs that step into, embios meaning to step in, referring to their silk tunnel behavior and how they dart back and forth in the complex mazes of their own design. The Hemiptera have about 400 known species. However, due to their hidden and limited range, as well as a lack of study and general morphological simplicity and similarity across species, it's estimated that they may have upwards of 2,000 species. In terms of evolutionary history, there hasn't been much study yet, but they are considered likely most related to perhaps stick insects or perhaps zooraptorans, which makes sense for their range, behavior, and morphology. Most are generalist detritivores or microherbivores, nibbling on dead plant matter, lichens, mosses, and even mold. These insects were originally mistaken for termites because of their social lifestyle. In terms of morphology, only the males possess wings, and they can fold them not just over their backs, but in half to better facilitate passage through their galleries. They can actually inflate and deflate their wings depending on how they're used at any given moment. An interesting adaptation because they don't use their wings very long, and in fact the males don't even eat. Neither males or females possess ocelli or light-sensing eyes because they rarely, if ever, leave the nest. These insects are unique, not in their ability to produce silk, as most insect groups have representatives that can produce silk. These guys are unique in where their silk comes from and how they use it. It comes from their forelegs, and they are the only insects able to produce silk from limbs. This method of silk production helps them greatly because of how they use it. When they create their complex and narrow silk tunnel systems, the silk wouldn't work as well if it came from their mouth or the tip of their abdomen. It would be much more difficult for them to manipulate the silk for the construction of their small, narrow tunnels that they live within. They rely on their tunnels to be narrow because narrower tunnels are easier to maintain with regard to humidity and heat. Not to mention, they're more difficult to enter and easier to camouflage and keep hidden. These silk galleries aren't just for protection. They help regulate the microclimate, ward off desiccation, and provide physical defense against small predators and parasitoids. Now, these insects are similar to termites in many social ways, but they are considered subsocial and not eusocial. That is, they are social with one another. They'll help each other out with regards to maintenance of the silk and sometimes even live communally, but they are not truly eusocial and don't follow the three main criteria necessary. Here are the three main criteria and how termites follow them and how web spinners do not. The first is the reproductive division of labor. There is no true caste system in web spinners, whereas in termites, there are multiple castes. With web spinners, all females are potentially reproductive, and there's no sterile working class. Therefore, no workers help to take care of young, as all the workers are also mothers, which is not so true of eusocial animals. Number 2, overlapping generations. This criteria actually does apply to some species of web spinners. In many species, a mother and her offspring cohabit temporarily, so there is some overlap, but not so much across multiple generations in a long-term sense, like in ants or termites. The third is the cooperative care of young. Maternal care is observed in web spinners in that females guard and groom their young, and they may expand the silk gallery for them. However, this care is not cooperative among non-reproductive siblings or strangers. It's strictly maternal and strictly individual. Mothers will actually become somewhat aggressive to one another after having children. The silk of Hemipterans is the finest among insects, meaning thinnest. While most web spinner species reproduce sexually, some exhibit parthenogenesis, a form of asexual clonal reproduction, where offspring develop from unfertilized eggs, which is a strategy only typically reliable in very stable environmental circumstances. Web spinners are quite sneaky. They exist worldwide, and in warmer places, they can be found as far north as Virginia. Some species have been accidentally introduced around the world because of their tendency to inhabit plants and bark, which has caused them to be transported to many greenhouses worldwide. Despite this, invasive species are unobtrusive and not very damaging, so they're not a very big economic concern. Overall, web spinners are quite understudied due to their aforementioned hidden and restricted range, along with their minimal economic impact. Indeed, these insects are among the least studied of all the orders. This is a shame because they have quite a few unique traits. They are the only insects, and likely the only terrestrial arthropods, that spend close to their entire lives within self-made infrastructure. Although some will leave for mating purposes, the strategy of these guys is similar to zoopterans, fig wasps, among other insects that rely on structural microhabitat defense, that is, taking up residence somewhere. Web spinners are unique in not only the fact that the majority of their life is spent in the microhabitat, but it's also constructed by them. These insects quite literally create their own microhabitat entirely from material that they produce, that is silk. Truly a fascinating and bizarre group of generalist herbivore insects. Thank you for watching this episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more bug content just like this. Thanks. This is the 5th video in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This video will be looking at the order Blattodea, commonly known as cockroaches. This video is not for how to get rid of cockroaches, simply their lifestyle and ecology. That being said, here's what the 5 most common cockroach species in the home look like. Let's begin. The order Blattodea belongs in the Neoptera, or new wing, and is the 3rd of 5 major subdivisions of insects. They are defined as the first insects to be able to fold their wings over their abdomen, and they all come in many shapes and sizes. Technically, termites belong in the order Blattodea, as they are direct genetic descendants of cockroaches, but their lives are so complex that I decided to cover them in a separate future video. The name Blatodia comes from two different languages. Blat, derived from the Latin word blatus, which means cockroach or pest. Blatus is closely connected to the Greek word blata, which has historically been used to refer to various types of cockroaches. Odia is a Greek suffix meaning like or resembling, so their name is basically resembling a cockroach. In English, cockroach is derived from the Spanish word cucaracha. The etymology of cucaracha is believed to derive from the late Latin word cucaraceus, which itself might have been a modification of cucurbita, meaning gourd or squash. This connection likely arose because of the cockroach's shape, which might have reminded people of the round shape of a gourd. These insects are found everywhere on Earth, except Antarctica, and are important for breaking down decaying matter within their ecosystems. This is because the cockroach is a detritivore, omnivore, cannibal, and will eat pretty much everything. It will eat whatever can sustain it, which is quite a lot. The only things they won't eat are toxins or substances with a heavy smell like garlic, and even then, if it's organic matter, they will eat it if they have no other option. They have the broadest diets in the insect kingdom, which is partly the reason they are so comfortable in our homes. Shown on the screen here is a list of just some of the things cockroaches can eat. This lineage of insects is extremely old, and it's what we call a generalist's generalist. Because they eat just about anything and exist just about anywhere, they have to be good at being prepared for any situation. Thus, the evolutionary pressures placed upon them have shaped them into a jack-of-all-trades survivalist. Here are some of the key refinements that the evolutionary pressures have gifted them. 1. Cockroaches can withstand radiation levels much higher than humans. They can survive decapitation for weeks and endure long periods without food or water. 2. They have a flattened body, which allows them to squeeze into tight spaces, making them difficult to eliminate in homes and natural environments, as they can enter tight spaces by making their body more compact, sort of like a cat. Number 3. They have fast reflexes and high speed. Their giant interneurons enable rapid escape responses. What this means is that their large nerves can help them react extremely quickly to vibrations and other stimuli, even more so than other insects. Number 4. Rapid reproduction. Species like the German cockroach, Platella germanica, breed rapidly, ensuring high population survival. This often coincides with food availability, allowing them to capitalize on a good situation. Number 5. Microbial symbiosis. Cockroaches harbor endosymbiotic bacteria that help them digest otherwise indigestible substances, such as cellulose. Many species are social or exhibit parental behavior to share these microbes, which is believed to be the reason that termites were able to evolve from cockroaches. But remember, cockroaches are not eusocial and do not form colonies, only small communities, and only for mutual reasons. Remember, these insects can be cannibals in the right circumstance. The cockroach does not lay eggs, so to speak. It lays an ootheca, which is more like a purse-like structure that contains the eggs. This disjointed type reproduction can help better protect and camouflage the eggs, as the ootheca is stronger than a typical egg case. These insects are reviled by humans because, despite everything we throw at them, they still manage to be the most difficult insects to remove from homes. But beyond this hatred, perhaps I can offer another perspective. This insect has a low number of species for how many of them there are. This is because they are extremely refined to their generalist niche. they are designed to be able to capitalize on the most common sense strategy and do so as efficiently as it takes. I like to say they're kind of like the Michael Ehrmantraut of the insect world, doing the hard work that needs to be done and doing it quickly and efficiently with no nonsense. Here's another interesting factor. In ecology, the competitive exclusion principle suggests that two species competing for the same exact resources cannot stably coexist. Since cockroaches have remained dominant as generalist scavengers for millions of years, other insects may have had to specialize to avoid direct competition. There is certainly enough room for two groups to fill the same niche, but insects and the passage of time are particularly brutal in this regard. Beetles and butterflies and wasps, the gross variety of insects we see in groups such as these today, is a result of niche specialization. Insects such as these often inhabit or consume or spend their lives on just one plant or animal. The point is that there are myriad ways for insects to specialize and adapt their lives to consume just a single food source, and do so in a very specific way. But most cockroaches have adapted to none of these. Their lack of specialization to anything but being generalists means that they take much less risk in ecological terms. Say a species of beetle only subsists off of one plant. If the plant dies, so does the beetle. The beetle might have more individuals in the places where its plant grows, and even more than the cockroach, but the cockroach can exist where that plant doesn't. In probabilistic terms, the cockroach is a huge umbrella as to its environments where it can survive. It has likely the biggest umbrella or adaptive range, so to speak, in the insect kingdom, even more than any specific beetle. They're a no-nonsense kind of bug, and this no-nonsense actually is likely a factor that drives diversity, especially as the passage of time refines and kills off unsuccessful insects. My point is a little speculative, but it is that cockroaches, over millions of years, being geared towards the generalist niche, are a factor that actively drives other insects to become more varied and stay away from generalizing. The cockroach is an insect that has filled its niche and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's okay for you to find them disgusting, because it is disgusting how well they survive. But perhaps cockroaches are owed a modicum of respect, because in an ecological context, no insect plays it safer. Thank you for watching this episode, and stay tuned for more bug content. This is the 12th episode in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This episode will be looking at termites from the order Isoptera, a fascinating and somehow understudied order of eusocial specialist detritivores. Technically, these insects are genetically similar to cockroaches, so much so that they are considered a suborder, meaning they actually belong within the order Blattodea, which contains cockroaches, and subsequently termites. However, these insects are so behaviorally and morphologically distinct, I decided to make them into their own video. But understand, this could also be considered a part 2 to the Blattodea episode. The name Isoptera comes from the Greek roots isos, meaning equal, and ptera, meaning wing. So, Isoptera literally means equal wings, referring to the fact that termites have 2 pairs of wings that are of equal size and shape, unlike many other winged insects, where the forewings and hind wings differ. That being said, termites don't keep their wings for most of their life. instead opting to use them simply for reproductive purposes. Termites are fascinating in that they have an incredibly low amount of biodiversity when measured against the total amount of biomass that the entire order takes up. Even compared against specifically the eusocial Hymenoptera, which is the order that contains ants, bees, and wasps, termite species are, on average, about 4.6 times more massive in terms of global biomass than each eusocial Hymenoptera species, meaning that, in purely technical terms, the termite is likely the animal with the lowest amount of biodiversity per unit of biomass among all terrestrial animals. This is true, and yet they practically don't exist within colder climates. So how can this be? How can such an impactful and important insect have such a lack of biodiversity? Well, what this implies is that the termite has a narrow but intensely winning strategy that wins despite a lack of biodiversity. But this is still strange because a lack of biodiversity creates the following problems. Number 1, a lower resilience to change. Number 2, narrower ecological functions. Number 3, reduced adaptive potential. And number 4, inbreeding and genetic bottlenecks. So basically, if their DNA is unresistant to change, and thus they are more vulnerable to pests and diseases, and lastly, if their niche becomes unsustainable even a little bit, they probably would not last. So, how do termites mitigate this? How do they survive with such low biodiversity? Well, it's quite an interesting story, so let's start at the beginning. Termites, as we've said before, evolved from cockroaches. But unlike cockroaches, termites are very specialized in diet, and they don't like to move away from home. Only the reproductives will leave home to start up colonies on their own. However, similarly to cockroaches, the gut bacteria of these insects is far more capable and complex than that of your average bug. Cockroaches possess a very strong gut biome, so that they're able to digest just about anything they consume. But the big secret of termites is that they've adapted this strong microbiome to very specific, unobtainable food resources, so that they can have a monopoly on said resources because other insects are unable to digest it. They basically refined the cockroach's ability to eat anything to being able to eat one thing that most other animals don't have the stomach for. Here's a list of these things that they have adapted to eat almost exclusively that other insects can't eat to the same degree. Some termites also cultivate fungus gardens like leafcutter ants, and others are somewhat opportunistic like ants as well. But the gross majority of termites make their living by getting the most nutrition out of things other insects cannot digest. They, similarly to cockroaches, will eat the feces of their parents or use trophallaxis in order to acquire the necessary gut symbionts they need to consume said matter. In this way, they are obligate to one another, which is one of the prerequisites for how they evolved to be eusocial insects, in that without the help and spread of the necessary symbionts, these insects could not have survived and thus needed to be social to capitalize on their niche and survive together. Now, this life strategy answers two things with regards to their low biodiversity. Those being that termites are resistant to change and possess strong niche stability, because what they eat is abundant and has been for millions of years, and often undigestible to anything other than termites. However, it does not yet answer the question, how are termites not devastated by pest and disease, despite living in such close quarters and having such low biodiversity? Indeed, this is a problem for agriculturalists of both plants and animals The banana industry is in perpetual chaos for this very reason: low genetic diversity and biodiversity. Well, the answer is that termites' gut microbiome more than makes up for their low biodiversity. While the variety found in termite DNA across species is quite low, the variety of species found in their gut is often higher than that of the surrounding soil. Indeed, there's an entire empire of bacteria that have been evolving codependently with termites for millions of years, protecting these animals from hostile invaders so that they have a place to call home. In response, the termites don't change all that much because they have to evolve slowly and with their microbiomes, in that every mutation or refinement of their DNA through natural selection has to account for the entire ecosystem inside of their bodies. Termites still evolve into many different niches and species, but there's still an incredible lack of biodiversity, likely due to an evolutionary lag of codependent evolution with the microbiome. This is all for the purpose of having exclusive success to exclusive resources. The eusociality, which is colony-forming behavior found within termites, is different from the eusociality found within ants, bees, and wasps. I explained haplodiploidy in the video above, which is one of the factors Hymenoptera use to effectively allocate tasks among their castes, allowing for far more differentiation among individuals in a colony due to more varied selective pressures being placed upon those individuals. Termites do not possess this, and so their caste determination is more traditional, so to speak, and more based on pheromonal cues and life stage, with no individual being 100% locked into any role straight from birth. What this means is that just about any old termite can become a reproductive queen or king under the right circumstances, whereas in ants, bees, and wasps, this is not the case, and some females are born sterile, and others are born to be queens. In termites, the caste differentiation process is influenced by environmental cues and chemical signals, mainly through hormones. The young, or nymphs, when exposed to specific hormones or pheromones, will develop into either workers, soldiers, or reproductive individuals. For example, if the colony is under stress, or there is a lack of workers, some workers may develop into new reproductive individuals to ensure the survival of the colony. Some species can even develop into reproductives in the worker or soldier stage, allowing for continued success at the sudden loss of a king or queen. Ants, bees, and wasps don't actually possess a king because their eusociality is structured differently. But in termites, the king will stay near the bloated queen and mate with her multiple times throughout her life. They'll mate for life until the king dies and is replaced by a new king. The queens of termites do it in this way because they live so long and require fresh sperm throughout their lives to maintain reproductive success. This is different in ants, bees, and wasps, who can collect and store all the sperm they need for their entire life in a one-time mating event right after they leave the nest. This is evident in the fact that in some species, termite queens can live a staggering 21 years. Some ant queens can live up to about 15 years. Many articles online say that termites can live up to 50 years, but I could not find a peer-reviewed source that confirms this, so I affirm it's only about up to 21 years. When it comes to nest building, it's fairly safe to say that termites have ants beat. In addition to some amazing features exclusive to termites, such as climate control and underground tunnels that stretch more than 100 meters underground, some can stand up to 30 feet tall. What this means is that it's possible that full-grown giraffes can and do encounter termite mounds almost double their height. Some mounds in Australia even use the Earth's magnetic field to sense which way the colony is facing so that they can build it facing north to south. They do this so that they are facing away from the sun at midday when it's the hottest, thus mitigating excessive heat. And then, at the time of day in which it's the coolest, the mound will be facing towards the sun. The majority of termite species are found in tropical and subtropical climates, like parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central and South America, and Northern Australia. These areas have the right amount of warmth and moisture for termites to thrive. Termites struggle far more than ants do with cold temperatures, because the upkeep of their gut microbiome is made even more difficult by the cold. And so, although some are somewhat adapted to surviving the winter, it's usually through very specific circumstances that are not conducive to the entire species surviving in the northern hemisphere. Here's a quick list of termite habitats. The morphology of the termite is fairly straightforward beyond their caste system. There are variations with regards to head shape, mandibles, and even eyes across workers, soldiers, and reproductives. But overall, their body plan is quite simple, designed to be adaptable for the many tasks that termites perform. There's almost zero specialization in their abdomen across all species, because they have an obligate specialization to containing the microbiome. In addition, if the nymph becomes a reproductive, any variation from a standard abdomen would make growing to a massive size impossible. Indeed, the queens can reach up to 10 to 30 times larger than the workers in body weight, and it usually takes several weeks to a few months after she's mated and started laying eggs for her to reach this size. Now let's discuss some eusocial dynamics with regards to termites. In a previous video, I discussed how termites became eusocial, so here I will just briefly explain certain key factors that assist in termite survival. Number 1. If the queen or king dies, some colonies can raise neotenic reproductives from the worker or nymph castes, kinda like emergency backups, which can recycle the colony into the next generation, allowing some colonies to survive for decades. Number 2. If the queen and king are still alive, the reproductives will still pair up and reproduce, but do so in swarming season, where they will grow wings, pair off, mate, and fly away to start their own colony. Here they will shed their wings much like ants, only ants' wings are quite different, and they don't keep the males around after mating. Number 3. Termite colonies are epigenetically programmed, much like bees, ants, and wasps, but they rely far more on pheromonal and environmental cues to decide what life stage they'll become and what tasks they'll perform. They use trail pheromones, warning pheromones, and even the king and queen utilize inhibitory pheromones on the workers and soldiers to prevent them from developing into reproductives before their time, which has much to do with succession. Number 4. Morphologically, despite ants, bees, and wasps having more castes and roles to perform much of the time, termites can still become quite exaggerated in their tasks despite their plasticity. Some termites act as suicide bombers, covering enemies in a sticky substance that erupts from their thorax to slow down predators. A fascinating thing to think about when considering that a soldier could have just as easily become a massive queen, who in some cases can lay up to 30,000 eggs a day. Ants don't exhibit such plasticity, but in return, they have more variety in the castes themselves. Termite castes, but not always, can be more exaggerated. However, there are fewer of them, usually only about 3. Termite relationships with humans are complicated. On one hand, they're infamous for chewing through wooden structures, causing billions of dollars in property damage each year. In North America, it's actually an invasive species that has caused most of this damage. Their hidden colony-based tunneling makes them hard to detect and even harder to evict, in that you can have termites and not even know it because they have no problem working in the dark. This can cause wooden furniture to collapse and even entire buildings. On the other hand, termites play a crucial role in many ecosystems by breaking down tough plant material like cellulose, helping recycle nutrients into the soil. So, despite causing problems, they are essential to the cleanup of forest floors and other ecosystems, eating the things that nothing else will. So, why are termites uniquely successful? Well, I would put forth the following reason. Termites can eat the most difficult to digest, but plentiful food resources. And, like cockroaches and mantises, they have been adapting towards this niche for an extremely long time. Longer than even ants, bees, and wasps. Indeed, they were the first insects and perhaps first animals on Earth to develop eusociality. That is, colony-forming behavior that satisfies these three criteria. These insects are the optimal cleanup crew who utilize the most effective resource exploitation strategy, that is, eusociality for the most abundant and exclusive resources. The gut microbiome they possess to accomplish this, however, has likely limited their adaptive potential. But it's obviously an incredibly stable niche, as they still survive despite their low biodiversity and have the second highest biomass of any terrestrial arthropod group, aside from eusocial ants, bees, and wasps, which succeed not because they can eat more, but because they can exploit more with a wider range of tasks. But the Hemiptera belongs in a future episode. Thanks for watching this episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more content just like this. Thanks. This is the 11th episode of a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This episode will be looking at mantises in the order Mantodea, a remarkably fascinating and beautiful order, and the second in the series in which every single individual has a predatory nature. The first was dragonflies. Some mantises may be slightly omnivorous despite this, but like dragonflies, they both cannot effectively digest plant matter and thus are obligate to predation. A good sign that these insects are effective generalist predators is the lack of species they have compared to other insects. The order only has about 2,400 known species, which speaks to the specificity and specialization of their niche. This may sound counterintuitive, but predators and generalists tend to have less and less variation found within their DNA, and thus might be considered more specialized. It just depends on the context in which the term specialized is used. Both the name mantis and the order name Mantodea come from the Greek word manto, meaning prophet or seer. Odea translates to resembles or looks like. Therefore, the mantis's name translates to looks like a prophet or seer, which is quite appropriate when looking at the regal, conniving appearance of these insects. The name is even more appropriate than you might think. These insects have some of the most superior vision in the insect kingdom. In addition to their three ocelli, which are simple light-sensing eyes, they also have two complex, compound eyes that are unique among insects. This is because, like vertebrates, they have binocular, stereoscopic vision, meaning they can combine images from both eyes in order to form one picture with greater depth perception. To give yourself some context for what depth perception means, you can do a quick test. In each hand, hold one finger in front of yourself at 2 separate distances. Look at them with both eyes. Now, shut one eye and notice how even though you know which one is farther away, visually it's harder to tell which one it is because you are no longer using your stereoscopic depth perception. This is what depth perception is, and mantises are the only insects, and maybe even the only invertebrates, known to possess binocular stereopsis. Not to mention, they have a 300-degree field of view and can turn their head almost 180 degrees. They use these eyes for optimal prey capture. They're designed to give the mantis an enormous field of view, similar to a Google Earth camera, but they specifically improve their sight when their prey is in optimal striking range, that is, right in front of them. Their vision is adapted to be wide but precise, and in some ways it's similar to our own, but it is more advanced in its ability to sense depth perception as well as motion parallax. In testing, it was found to be more attuned to sensing depth perception through motion than the human participants, but less for static images, meaning that it can ignore camouflage and focus on specifically moving targets in order to capture prey. This is why, when prey is not moving, the mantis bobs its head up and down to establish its own depth perception. In short, their vision is not quite as good as ours, but is refined from ours for the purpose of effective prey capture through precision strikes. And so even though it is superior among invertebrates, it's still very specific to the tasks the mantis performs. When it comes to the other senses, interestingly, the mantis has only one tympanal ear located on the underside of its abdomen, and thus cannot perceive distance with regard to sound. A single ear is useful to know if sound is happening rather than where it's coming from, which is helpful for certain scenarios, such as the echolocation coming from bats and other noise-producing predators. The mantis has enormous, grasping forelimbs called raptorial legs. Many other insects have actually evolved similar legs, in a case of rampant convergent evolution in vastly different groups, with examples being ambush bugs, mantid flies, assassin bugs, giant water bugs, and even hanging flies, although in hanging flies it's the hind limbs rather than the forelimbs. What this means is that this strategy is likely the optimal one with regards to grasping and consuming prey. Indeed, all these insects consume their prey after getting a vice grip on them. The mantis's abdomen is elongated, and as it eats, you can watch it fill up in real time, like a mosquito with blood. They eat like this so they can store large kills and their nutrients for later, thus allowing them to eat the entire portion of a meal and not let their effort go to waste. An extremely energy-efficient strategy. The size of the mantis is also an interesting factor. These insects come in many beautiful, vibrant, sometimes unbelievable colors and patterns. They usually do this to mimic common flower species, or sticks and branches, in order to cash in on unlucky pollinators and arboreal insects. The mantis also has lightning-fast reflexes and can strike and grasp its prey in about 70 milliseconds. It can achieve this as its raptorial legs are actually spring-loaded and build up potential energy, which they store through a latch mechanism. Once this latch releases, the legs shoot out at incredible speed, in a similar way to a chameleon's tongue, or a leafhopper's jump. Basically, mantises have optimized a generalist sit-and-wait predator niche early on in such a way that they can go after prey at larger and larger sizes. Indeed, some of these bugs even hunt small rodents and birds. With regards to habitat, Because mantises rely on daytime and camouflage for their hunting prowess, they are typically found within environments of dense vegetation and abundant sunlight. They are surprisingly well adapted for urban environments because they require many optimal hiding places along with effective hunting locations. Mantises adore gardens and other serene, human-made environments for their abundance of prey and curated plant selection. Listed are some of the habitats that mantises enjoy. The mantis is preyed upon by many vertebrates and a few invertebrate specialists, especially wasps. To combat this, they often raise their raptorial limbs above themselves, spread their wings, which are usually brightly colored, and stand up straight to appear larger and more intimidating. Some even release a hissing sound by expelling air quickly from their abdomen. In addition, similarly to stick insects, mantises often rock back and forth, similar to a leaf, to better facilitate camouflage. Although this could also be just to increase their depth perception, as stated earlier. Mantises are popular symbols across various cultures due to their striking appearance and intuitive genteel hunting strategy. In China, a martial art has been adapted from the posture of the mantis called Tanglenquan style of Kung Fu, which is based on quick, precise strikes and deceptive stillness of the insect. Legend claims it was developed during the Ming Dynasty after a monk watched a mantis fight off a bird. Here it is in action. Wow! With regard to reproduction, mantises typically only live for about a year, and in colder climates they lay their eggs just before winter, as the adults all die off. Then spring comes around and the eggs will hatch, beginning the next generation. Mantises belong to the insect infraorder Dictyoptera, which includes cockroaches as well. They are related to this group because they have a short ovipositor and lay an ootheca, which is something of a protective disjointed reproduction strategy, almost like a stationary incubator. Cockroaches lay an entire egg case, but mantises instead lay a foamy substance which hardens and then builds their ootheca from scratch. They will then lay their eggs inside it, thus starting the next generation. This disjointed reproduction is important as mantises are not social animals in the slightest. They often eat their mates after fertilization, and they would happily eat their own young, and often do. You may ask yourself, why does the mantis often eat her suitors? Well, it may sound brutal, but in doing so, she is helping the next generation. She is both keeping herself well fed, along with giving essential nutrients to her offspring. A female will often only mate once per clutch of eggs, and so males are of no use to her for quite some time after the fact. There is much nuance and romance with regards to mantis's mating strategy, or lack thereof, and I would not do it justice explaining in just this video. But overall, I will say that the sexual cannibalism is beneficial to the females in this order in several fun and interesting ways. So, why are mantises among the largest insects that are also dedicated apex predators? Clearly, their strategy has proven successful despite their similarity to many other insects. So what is it that they do differently and uniquely from other insects to have dominated this niche? Well, here's a list of things that have likely synergized to help them become what they are today. Number 1. These insects evolved from cockroaches, but adapted the generalist feeding strategy into a generalist predation strategy. Other insects would have needed to evolve away from being more specialized in diet, but the head start mantises had helped them, because they've had more time to adapt and refine the niche that many other insects occupy. Number 2. Their previously mentioned superior vision is a unique trait to only them and requires high metabolic cost to maintain. This means that they need high-quality food sources their entire life to sustain better vision, and so have adapted to a risky lifestyle to dominate the niche by eliminating the risk through extremely accurate and consistent prey capture. Number 3. Their elongated, colorful bodies and incomplete metamorphosis allow them to be camouflaged and killing from day one. Other insects might have had to go through a larval stage or evolve away from a typical flat or roundish body plan. Number 4. Lastly, mantises possess tegmina, which insects with complete metamorphosis don't really have. They can possess flight but still remain well camouflaged. Beetles possess similar elytra, but the body plan and larval stage of the beetle means it's less conducive to evolving a sit-and-wait predatory strategy, in which mobility is sacrificed for effective grasping of prey. Indeed, many predatory insects prefer a rush-down hunting strategy, especially among more streamlined, less stick-like insects, such as tiger beetles, dragonflies, or tarantula hawks. All these insects ambush by chasing the prey down as opposed to sitting and waiting. It seems that raptorial forelegs are more optimal for this sit-and-wait strategy, even with hanging flies, who simply hang from a branch as they wait for something to fly by, which they can grasp and then consume. Overall, I would chalk up mantises to maximizing both prey capture and energy efficiency in order to maintain their status as the largest terrestrial ambush insect hunters. Let's just take a moment to appreciate the beauty of this order. Thanks for watching this episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more bug content. Thanks. This is both the 17th and 18th part in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. I've decided to combine these two episodes because it contains the lice, that is, the book lice, bark lice, and parasitic lice. And even though the three have different overall diets and behavior, they are related enough to be considered within the same order. As you can see, parasitic lice, or the Heteroptera, were originally in a different order from the book and bark lice, but now all three groups fall under the same name, Socodea, and so all three will be gone over in this video. The order Socodea derives its name from the Greek word sokos, which means rubbed or gnawed, referring to their distinct feeding method of scraping and then siphoning material. This will be a common theme throughout the video, as the Socodea are all very passive insects that don't really do much in the way of hunting. They are detritivores or parasites that often show up in loose subsocial congregations on their food items of choice, namely bark, books, or large vertebrates. If I had to give these morphologically fairly simple animals a key defining trait compared to all the other insect orders, I would say these guys are specifically designed for social grazing, similar to sheep and the like. Way back in my silverfish and bristletail episode, I compared those two groups to Socodia. This is because all three are detritivores and mimic each other in interesting ways, especially with regards to diet. Book and bark lice feed on molds and fungi found either in homes or in the wild. Silverfish are similar in that they live in damp, dark areas and eat the starchy detritus of their environment. Bristletails match bark lice in the same fashion, except they're more out on the open and feed on the detritus outside. But the key difference is that silverfish and bristletails will eat the dead plant material, whereas bark and book lice will only eat the fungal or microbial surface level biofilm. In both silverfish bristletails and bark and book lice, they are built for abrasion, not piercing or sucking. This is a primitive generalist feeding mode, ideal for life in nooks and crannies. Interestingly, silverfish bristletails, bark and book lice all possess specialized scraping mouthparts to effectively collect foodstuffs, but they are not closely related at all in evolutionary history. They've simply convergently evolved in how they eat. Silverfish and bristletails, however, are solitary creatures, and book and bark lice and even parasitic lice are often gregarious, meaning they form small groups. Their locomotion is different as well. Silverfish and bristletails are both extremely quick and quite jumpy, but they cannot fly at all, actually predating insect flight in evolutionary history. Book and bark lice do possess flight, depending on the species. Parasitic lice don't possess wings at all, but they can still get to where they need to go by jumping from one host to another if they rub up against one another, or even jumping onto a proxy host, such as a fly. Next, I will list all the key differences between the three main groups within the Socodia. Book lice are the most common found in homes. They eat microscopic fungi and molds that grow on plant or animal-based materials. They also feed on starches, yeast, whole grains, pollen, algae, lichen, and occasionally dead insects, feathers, or hair. That being said, they won't actually eat the objects themselves, but the living biofilm on top of the objects. Many species are parthenogenetic, meaning females can reproduce without mating, which I discussed in my previous episode on stick insects, and went over how this typically only happens with insects that have very reliably stable niches. Book lice are primarily found in warm, damp, and undisturbed areas. Their common habitats include around old books and papers, feeding on starchy glues and bindings and mold, in damp basements, crawl spaces, and bathrooms, around leaky plumbing, in stored food products, especially grain, flours, and cereals, and in newly constructed buildings, where plaster and drywall might still be damp. Outdoors, they're found in similar dark, damp niches, where you can find them in caves, obscure forest crevices, and the like. These insects are small, usually colorless, and difficult to tell apart across species. They can complete their life cycle in under 30 days, and they lay their eggs in small clusters. As you can see, they are colorless and somewhat dull. These insects match the color found in their environment, with book lice specifically looking like they belong in caves. Bark lice, in contrast, can be very colorful, and they're found outdoors, doing much the same things as book lice, only they do it on trees and the like. They often form larger congregations and also have wings more frequently to aid in their dispersal. When found on plants, they are actually not dangerous to them, as they consume the biofilm, not the object it's resting upon, in the same way book lice do. Instead, they only do it on trees and other plants. They do not consume the living tissues of trees or plants, instead opting more for the algae, lichens, fungi, and molds. Bark lice are commonly found outdoors on tree bark, the leaves of trees and shrubs, under loose bark or stones, in leaf litter, and some species will even produce extensive silken webs that cover sections of tree trunks or branches, creating a silken sheath. Indeed, unlike the other forms of lice, bark lice will use silk shields either individually to protect their young, or even communally to protect themselves. They are not social creatures, however, and only congregate for the same reason sheep do, safety in numbers, but they will build these webs together. The parasitic chewing and sucking lice are the last of the three major groups of lice. Most lice in this group parasitize birds, and there is a difference between the chewing and the sucking lice. Chewing lice infest both mammals and birds, and they actually feed on excess skin waste, such as skin flakes, hair, feathers, and the like. They don't typically spread disease to the animals they are living on, and are annoying but not altogether dangerous. There are no chewing lice that infest humans, however, but the same cannot be said of the sucking lice. The sucking lice typically only infest mammals, and they exist by siphoning blood straight from their host. There are only 3 species of louse that infest humans. They are head lice, body lice, and crabs. Each species targets different overall parts of the body, as their name implies, and all 3 can cause itching and slight blood loss, but only body lice are known as disease vectors. Although all the diseases they are known to spread are now easily treatable with modern medicine, historically, lice have been very deadly creatures because they spread typhus, trench fever, and relapsing fever. Typhus and relapsing fever have especially killed hundreds of thousands of people, especially in times of war, or in forced unsanitary periods where people were living in close quarters without access to medicine or proper hygiene. That being said, lice are not attracted to unhygienic bodies as compared to hygienic ones. They will target whomever, but regular showers and other hygienic practices are a good treatment but not deterrent of lice. This makes sense when considering that lice are obligate to their hosts, meaning they cannot survive without them for more than a few days. Many species have evolved to be host-specific because of this, and lay their eggs or nits directly onto the host, some never switching and growing up, and then dying on the animal they were born on. This is why hygienic practices are so effective. With fleas, they don't actually spend their entire life cycle on the host. And so, because of this differentiation, the way to treat lice and stop it from spreading is a lot more controlled and easy than with fleas or mites. The lice are an interesting and surprisingly colorful order of simple grazing insects. They are perfectly adapted for surface level feeding, whether it be on rocks, bark, or people. These insects work very hard to have relaxed, passive lives, with the biggest moments of their lives often being just deciding where and what to eat. Thanks for watching this episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more bug content just like this. Thanks. This is the 19th episode in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview to the insect orders. This episode will be looking at the very large and diverse order Hemiptera. Indeed, this is the most diverse order so far in this list, and the most diverse order that does not have complete metamorphosis, meaning no larval or pupal stage. The name Hemiptera comes from the Greek hemi, meaning half, and ptera, meaning wing. So, Hemiptera literally means half wing, in reference to how many of the representatives of this order have forewings that are half leathery and then half translucent in a structure called a hemielytra. That being said, likely only about half of hemipterans have these structures, with the rest having more typical transparent wings. The common name for these insects is simply bug, which is why they are often called true bugs, but they are so morphologically varied that the best way to identify them is by their long proboscis or rostrum, that is, the needle-like mouthpart they use to suck up liquids. All true bugs have this, from water striders to cicadas to stink bugs to aphids. These insects are found worldwide and have a quiet but substantial impact on the environment and sometimes catastrophic effects on agriculture. Listed here are the top 5 most damaging hemipterans to crops, who have collectively caused billions of dollars of damage in crop losses every year. They are basically the mosquitoes of plants, as they spread viruses and cause systemic crop health issues. They are arguably the most damaging group to fruits and vegetables worldwide. The Hemiptera are divided into 4 distinct suborders, and I will sequentially go over each of them, their key representatives, and how they differ. But first, let's go over what all 4 suborders have in common. That is, what truly distinguishes the order Hemiptera from other insect groups. The first is a piercing, sucking, straw-like mouthpart that can be sheathed when not in use. This mouthpart, or rostrum, is fairly sophisticated. It can simultaneously suck up fluids whilst expelling saliva, which it typically does in order to excrete digestive enzymes to better facilitate digestion, similarly to spiders. The second is that all these insects have incomplete metamorphosis, that is, no larval or pupal stage, only a nymph stage. The third is that they feed on liquids rather than solids, and typically have a specialized diet to match. And lastly, not all have it, but they are the only order where some representatives have a hemielytra, and these help to protect them. Now let's get straight into the suborders. Number 1, the Heteroptera. These are the most diverse of the 4 Hemiptera suborders, making up around 40,000 of the 60 to 80,000 species of Hemiptera estimated to exist. They exhibit a wide range of feeding habits and lifestyles, from plant feeding to being large aquatic predators. They usually have a pretty distinct shield morphological shape to them, and the characteristic half wing on their forewing, which the other suborders typically don't possess. These guys are the best defended of the suborders in terms of physical strength and defense. They have to use this to capitalize on their more generalist diet within their specialized feeding style. That is, they still only consume the liquids of plants and animals, but many eat from a wide range of different plants and animals, as opposed to specializing on just one. This goes for all their feeding strategies, be it herbivory, carnivory, omnivory, or even aquatic lifestyles. The majority of Heteroptera will feed on more than just one species, with the exception of the parasitic variety, who will usually feed on just one type of mammal's blood. But again, there is variation. For example, the bedbug prefers humans, but will target other mammals as well. A number of species within this suborder can spread deadly pests and disease, such as certain species of kissing bugs or assassin bugs, which can spread Chagas disease, which kills about 12,000 people every year. Because these guys have invested into the strength and strategies to take over the generalist niches, the other suborders have subsequently specialized, and all three are herbivores. Number 2. The Sternorrhyncha, or Hemiptera, are the cicadas, leafhoppers, plant hoppers, spittlebugs, and tree hoppers. These guys are all sort of short and squat with fat faces, and are less shield-shaped and more tubular in design. You can recognize them pretty easily, as they nearly all look like smaller versions of cicadas, although plant hoppers and leaf hoppers are distantly related to cicadas. These guys actually have a fascinatingly wide array of morphs and colors and patterns. These guys usually only consume one type of plant, but they don't do it socially, and they will move around a decent amount throughout their lives. And so most you'll find with the ability to fly and or jump. And because they can get around a lot, they need sound sometimes to communicate their location to one another, as is made evident by cicadas every year in many parts of the world, who produce sound with their abdomen through an organ called a timbal.
It's like the National Geographic.
Number 3 is the Sternorrhyncha, which contains the aphids, whiteflies, scale insects, and other psyllids. Now, like the last group, these guys only consume plants, specifically the phlegm found inside the soft tissue of plants, but they are not designed to get around much, which is why you'll often find them in large conspicuous congregations, and often only until the food has run out. But by then, they've potentially repeated their life cycle several times. Indeed, some species can give birth to their first offspring a week after being born, and the vast majority of specifically aphid species can even reproduce asexually to further expedite reproduction. Not every species in this suborder are in such a big hurry, but nearly all set up camp on just one plant in large congregations, with potentially dozens of generations being reproduced on the same plant. And in terms of plants they specialize to, it's nearly every single kind. Some trees can host even 100,000 of these guys at one time. And they get away with it all because they rarely actually kill the plants that they're feeding on, actually being far more likely to kill the plant through diseases they spread rather than sheer numbers of individuals that are feeding. Being out on the open does carry its risks, and ladybugs are a prime example. But did you know that in order to protect themselves from predators, that some aphids partner up with ants? And indeed some are even obligate to being livestock for ants? Aphids produce a substance called honeydew, which they feed to the ants through the sugary leftovers of the sap they consume. And in return, the ants will protect them from ladybugs and other predators. But some aphids actually live inside ant colonies exclusively, reproducing and repopulating alongside the ants in a mutualistic, obligate relationship, as these aphids could no longer survive on their own out in the wild. Many of the insects in this suborder have winged adults, or only winged females or males, really depending on how they've evolved to disperse. These insects often time their reproduction and their wing growth based on environmental cues, which means their life cycle basically corresponds to the plant they've specialized to. Some of these insects have taken this a step further and are actually stationary in their adult stage, like barnacles. This is actually relatively unique in the insect world. These are the scale insects, and after hatching from their mother's scale, they will crawl around seeking a home, where they will then lock themselves into place and develop their own scale, becoming fully stationary and protected for the remainder of their adult life. The fourth is Sternorrhyncha, or the moss bugs. These are the final and most primitive of the suborders of Hemiptera, and they don't stand out a whole lot, feeding in a similarly vegetarian manner to the other two previously mentioned suborders, the biggest difference being that they feed exclusively on moss and liverwort. That and their exceptional camouflage are all that really stands out about these guys. They are not particularly well studied, and they are primitive and feed on moss, and other than that, they're pretty similar to the rest of the Hemipteran suborders, proving the strategy tried, true, and simple. Now, this all begs the question, how are the Hemiptera so diverse and successful when all they seem to do differently is eat differently from the other insects? Well, let's go over why Hemiptera is the outlier of the top 5 most diverse insect orders, listed here. Now, of these 5, Hemiptera is the only one that has incomplete metamorphosis, meaning that when they hatch from their eggs, they look like little versions of themselves, rather than a grub, maggot, or caterpillar. This is the key difference between complete and incomplete metamorphosis. But what does this have to do with Hemiptera's success? Complete metamorphosis typically exists to help with specialization, giving the larval and adult stages vastly different burdens to help the overall lifespan of the insect. How can an order as specialized as Hemiptera not benefit from complete metamorphosis? Well, here's the answer. The Hemipterans eat in an extremely precise and reliable way. The blood or internal juices of a plant and animal are often the most nutrient-dense part of the life form. It's the perfect meal if you can capitalize on it. But in order to do so, you have to have the right adaptations. Both the nymphs and adults of Hemipterans feed the same way on the same hosts, which means Hemipterans don't need a radical habitat or diet shift during development, as many insects with complete metamorphosis do have, because they're designed to have this. This stable and abundant food niche allows for strong host fidelity and co-evolution with food sources, which, depending on the food source and environment, is preferential to the radical departure that is complete metamorphosis. They are basically designed to be the specialists of the insect world that complete metamorphosis doesn't really help, which puts them in an awkward but stable spot in the insect kingdom. From cicadas to water striders to aphids to assassin bugs, Hemiptera are one of the most difficult insects to get specific with in identification. And it's not just because their common name is bug. It's because so many common Hemipterans look so different. Nature is balanced, but often in very broad ways, and the true bugs are true examples of it. Let's take a moment to appreciate the vast diversity of this order. Thanks for watching this episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more bug content just like this. Thanks. This is the 20th episode in a 30-part series giving an ecological overview of the insect orders. This video will be looking at Sternorrhyncha, or the Thrips, a peculiar and offbeat insect order that borders between the holometabolic and hemimetabolic orders, that is, insects with incomplete and complete metamorphosis. They exist somewhere in between. The name Sternorrhyncha is thysanos, which is Greek for fringe or tassel, and ptera, which is Greek for wing. Therefore, the name Sternorrhyncha literally means fringed wings, referring to the unique structure of their wings, which are narrow and fringed with long hairs. These wings should highlight the average size of thrips because it's very small, often only about a millimeter long, which is about the size of a grain of sand. Despite their size, however, these are complicated and fascinating insects that live complex lives. The distinctive feathery wings of the thrip are actually wings possessed by many other minuscule insects. Economically, at that size, wings don't function quite the same. In fact, much less effort is required on the insect to achieve lift. So these guys possess what's called a clap and fling mechanism, which allows them to fly at such a small size. At that scale, the aerodynamics function much differently, and it's actually harder to get off the ground than it is to sustain flight, due to the dynamics of momentum and drag at that scale. To work against this, thrips have large fringed wings that snap downwards, because at this scale, lift is much more important than thrust. At this scale, air works somewhat like a sticky fluid, and they are fighting to stay aloft, not to move quickly through the air. These insects are noticeably elongate for 3 reasons. The first is that their slim bodies help them to navigate effectively in their microhabitats. The second is that it complements the aerodynamics of their wings. And the third is that it helps to stabilize their bizarre, asymmetrical mouthparts. These mouthparts perform 2 functions. The first is that they lacerate or liquefy the plant cells on nearly all parts of the plant they're consuming. After the plant cells are sufficiently ruptured and sliced open, they will slurp up the content with their other mouthparts. This is opposed to aphids, who simply stick a needle-like mouthpart, called a rostrum, into the plant to drink its internal fluids. Thrips instead turn the plant's outsides into something it can drink like its insides. Most other insects don't have the adaptations to eat plants in this way, and so the niche has become differentiated for thrips, with many of their unique strategies suited to this diet. Here's a list of some of them. Many thrips are gall-forming. That is, they manipulate the plant's tissues into growing abnormally. These often become structures which the thrips use for shelter and defense. Some thrips even utilize these galls to form colonies that are very close to being considered eusocial, similar to ants. These colonies follow all 3 eusocial criteria, except that their caste system is flexible, never fixed, and thus there is no reproductive monopoly and no true sterility among individuals, meaning it's not true eusociality, but very, very close. Of the 6,000 known species of thrips, only a few get this close to eusociality, with most species actually being solitary, and a few just forming loose congregations with parental care. In some more social groups, they actually have morphological plasticity, depending on their group dynamics and the amount of resources. Specifically, some will develop wings and some won't. Some thrips can only reproduce through parthenogenesis, that is, clonally, only producing generations of females with no males. However, these insects are also one of two major insect groups that possess haplodiploidy, at least the majority of them do. What this means is that the mothers can decide what sex her offspring will become, and if the offspring becomes a male, that male will be reproduced clonally, that is, not with a father. In contrast, the daughters will be reproduced with both a mother and a father. The other major group with this feature is the Hymenoptera, or ants, bees, and wasps, and I go deeper into this topic in this video. But why is this relevant? Well, thrips benefit from haplodiploidy because their lives are very host and microhabitat specific. Having greater control over your reproductive output and sex ratios will change the reproductive incentives of your offspring, and it has both social and resource-saving benefits within certain contexts. Particularly, the Hymenoptera and the Thysanoptera find themselves in microhabitats very often. And in that context, haplodiploidy lets a single mother fine-tune the sex ratio of her offspring to maximize reproductive success in a tiny, isolated, or temporary habitat, even to the point of producing a mini colony with guards, breeders, and no need for external mates. Basically, a lot of insects set up camp or home in a very small space, and haplodiploidy basically allows a lack of familial tension within that context. Because of the thrips' expedited reproductive efficiencies, they adapt to pesticides very easily, as it mimics the specific and rapid adaptation they need to maintain and continue their way of life as external plant parasites. And despite their primarily herbivorous nature and their terrorization of agricultural industries, some thrips are actually predatory and parasitic of other insects, indicating that their unique set of traits is more adaptable than initially thought. In addition, many thrips pollinate and are also thought to be among the first pollinators in evolutionary history, being uniquely adapted to the task due to their intimate but rarely deadly relationship with their host plants. Thrips are one of the very few insects that possess an intermediate form of metamorphosis. Despite technically falling under the umbrella of incomplete metamorphosis, in fact, in this list of orders, these are the final insects considered to have incomplete metamorphosis. They are at something of an evolutionary crossroads, possessing sort of a pupal stage, but not quite. Two of their instars of this insect order are nearly immobile, but not quite. They don't feed, but they can move around a little bit. Their pupal stage is immobile and non-feeding, which resembles the pupa of complete metamorphosis. But internally and externally, their biology is far more similar to incomplete metamorphosis. And so this is why we consider them to have intermediate metamorphosis, basically a stepping stone in the evolutionary pathway towards complete metamorphosis. Because of the thrips' intimate relationship with plants and their secretive and hardy nature, these guys are considered the worst invasive species for plant diseases in the world. Despite being few in number with the species that actually spread disease, they transmit over 20 of some of the worst ones and have caused millions of dollars in both agricultural damages and allocation of resources towards study. Not to mention, they are small, difficult to eradicate, and still spreading rapidly and in novel ways. They have high reproductive rates and are so adaptable that they have to be constantly studied for pest control methods to keep up. They are often used as model organisms to test the effectiveness of pesticides due to their unique ability to adapt against them quicker than most insects. Thrips are an odd but fascinatingly unique insect. They seem to be at the crossroads of many of the major life strategies which dominate the insect world today. They are fascinating and unpredictable creatures, and despite their small size, have made quite an impact on the world at large. Thanks for watching this episode of Privileged Bug Facts. Stay tuned for more bug content just like this. Thanks.